The third salvo hit the gray, and the gray kept walking. Submarshal Ossivant Dre watched it happen from the forward gallery of the flagship Anthony, both of his lower hands flat on the rail, his upper hands folded behind the plated ridge of his back, the way his caste was taught to stand when the truth of a thing outran the plan for it. Below him, past the armored glass, the plain of Sethar Reach ran flat and white under a noon sun, and across that plain a shape the size of a supply crawler moved at the unhurried pace of something with nowhere it needed to be by any particular hour. The plain around it was not calm. The plain around it was coming apart. Kinetic lances had chewed craters the width of landing pads into the crust. Plasma had turned a whole belt of the approach to glass, and the glass had cracked and buckled and was still cooling in long orange seams. The garrison's eastern battery had fired until its heat sinks went white, and then it had fired anyway. And Dre had felt the deck of his own ship shiver 200 kilometers up as the ground weapons let go with everything a conquered fortress was permitted to carry. And the gray kept walking. It did not run. That was the part none of them had been ready for. Dre had briefed the fleet on a berserker, on a thing that would charge the guns and die on them the way apex predators died when they finally met a weight of fire that nature had never prepared them to survive. He had told his gunners to hold their nerve, that no animal on any world closed a killing ground at a stroll. He had been certain of it the way he was certain of gravity. The gray walked into the eastern batteries firing solution the way a laborer walks into weather, head low, shoulders rolling, and where the shells found it, and they found it, Dre saw the flashes wash over its flank, saw the dust jump off its coat. It simply came out the far side of the light and continued, and behind it the battery it had walked past was on fire, and no one had ordered the battery to be on fire. "Report," Dre said. The pit below the gallery answered in the overlapping voices of 40 stations. Eastern battery, offline, crews evacuating, cause of ignition unknown. Orbital lance array, recharging 90 seconds. Shield wall generators at the garrison perimeter, holding at full, no breach, no contact. The thing had not touched the shield wall. The thing had not touched anything. It had walked a straight line across the most heavily defended stretch of ground in the sector, and the only casualties in the last 4 minutes had been conquered. A battery cooking off its own munitions, a crawler crew that had panicked and driven into a crater, a shield node that had overloaded because someone dialed it past its rated draw in the belief that more power was the same as more courage. "It is not attacking us," said the voice at Dre's elbow, and he did not turn because he knew the voice, and he was tired of the voice. Vessel scholar Cressa Un had been aboard the Anthony for 19 days, and in that time she had been right about the gray more often than the entire tactical staff combined, which was precisely why Dre could not stand to look at her. She was ashen, boneless and pale, and folded into the mobility harness her kind wore among hard-decked species, and her skin ran through slow bands of color as she watched the plain, deep green at the mantle, a nervous silver flickering along the arms. Green in an ashen was thought. Silver was fear. She was doing both at once, and she was not bothering to hide either, and that alone should have told Dre something, because Cressa Un did not frighten. She had walked the wrecks of 2 Deathworld quarantine breaches and filed her reports in a flat hand. She was frightened now. "It has been attacking us for 200 days, Dre said. "It has left 11 outposts as dispatches that stop mid-sentence. I have read the dispatches." "You have read the dispatches," Cressa agreed. "Read them again. Not one of them says the creature attacked. They say the outpost tried to hold it. There is a difference, Sub-Marshal, and the difference is the whole of the matter, and I have been trying to make you see it for 19 days. On the plain, the gray stopped. The whole pit went quiet, the way a room goes quiet when the thing it has been shouting at finally does something it was not shouting for. Dre leaned into the rail. 200 kilometers was nothing to the flagship's optics. The gallery glass resolved the creature as though it stood at the foot of the gallery itself. It was a hound. That was the maddening, insulting truth of it that the fleet had never been able to swallow. The terror of 11 outposts, the thing 11,000 tons of conquered ordnance had failed to stop, was a hound, four-legged and heavy-shouldered and gray about the great blunt muzzle, with the loose folds and the sorrowful brow of an animal that had lived a long time and expected to live longer. It was enormous by the measure of the small, warm-blooded things conquered xenology filed under companion fauna, and it was nothing at all by the measure of a war fleet. A Vor warrior in full plate outmassed it. Dre outmassed it. And it had walked through his eastern battery like a man walking through a bead curtain. It had stopped because it had found water. A kinetic lance had cracked the crust and opened an aquifer, and the water had pooled dark in the bottom of the crater, and the gray put its head down and drank. It drank for a long time, unhurried, and then it lifted its head, and the water ran off its jowls in ropes, and it stood a moment in the white noon light and looked, without any urgency at all, toward the garrison. "It is thirsty," Cressa said softly. "Submarshal, it walked through your guns, and now it is thirsty and it stopped for a drink. Does that read to you as a war beast? Does that read to you as anything that came here to fight?" "Then what did it come to do?" Dre said, and he meant it as a dismissal, the flat rhetorical stone his caste dropped on a subordinate who had run past the edge of their competence, but it did not come out that way. It came out as a question, a real one from the bottom of him, and Cressa heard it as a real one, and she turned all four of her eyes on him for the first time in 19 days. "You are holding the answer in your own garrison," she said. "You have been holding it for 106 days. And every day you have refused to give it back, and every day that creature has walked a little closer, and you have called it a monster because the alternative is unbearable, which is that it is not a monster and you started this." Dre did not answer her. On the plain, the gray shook itself, a full-body ripple that threw a corona of water and dust off its coat and made 3 separate weapons cruise 200 kilometers away flinch at their stations. And then it lowered its head and began, once more, to walk. 90 seconds later, the orbital lance array finished recharging and Dre gave the order to fire it, because he was the sub-marshal and the order was his to give, and he could not think of another one. The array was the heaviest weapon the fortress world was permitted, a spear of coherent force meant to gut capital ships in the high dark. It came down through the noon sky in a column of white so bright the gallery glass polarized itself black to save the crew's eyes, and it struck the plain where the gray walked, and the ground under the strike ceased to be ground and became a rising wall of vaporized crust, and the shockwave reached the garrison a heartbeat later and knocked the shield wall down to 60%, and threw a Talving clerk off her feet in the command spine, and rang the Ansithine's hull like a struck bell from 200 kilometers up. When the light cleared and the glass let the sun back in, the gray was still walking. It had a new scorch across its shoulders. It had lost the tips of the fur along its spine. It walked with the same rolling, patient, ground-eating gait it had walked with all morning, out of a crater that had not existed a moment ago, and it did not so much as turn its head toward the sky that had tried to kill it. And Ossivant Dre understood, with the cold completeness of a man watching his own certainty die, that there was nothing in the fortress that was going to stop this, that there had never been anything in the fortress that was going to stop this, and that Cressa had been right for 19 days. "Cease fire," he said. The pit did not react. He said it again, louder, in the register the Vor used for orders that were not to be discussed, and the pit reacted then, weapons safing across 40 stations, and into the silence that followed Cressa said, very quietly, "Thank you," and Dre told her to bring him everything the garrison held on the human boy, and to bring it to him now. They had taken the boy 106 days ago, and it had not, at the time, seemed like the sort of thing that started wars. Prefect Alund Sale had signed the order himself, and in the privacy of his own administrative conscience, he had thought of it as a small good deed folded inside a small piece of protocol. A human survey cutter had come apart in the contested drift beyond Sethar Reach, reactor failure. No fault of the Concorde, the human's own aging hull, and the Concorde picket that reached the wreck had pulled one living body out of it, a young one, half frozen, alone. By every clause of the border accords, the Concorde was obliged to render aid to a distressed vessel and then repatriate survivors through the neutral channels. Sale had rendered the aid. He had simply been slow about the repatriation. The boy was a human, and humans were the newest and least understood signatories of the accords, and Sethar Reach was a research fortress before it was a garrison, and the standing directive from the Concorde's deep study branch was unambiguous. Any live specimen of a category Deathworld species that fell into Concorde hands through no coercion of the Concorde's own was to be observed, catalogued, and understood before it was returned. So they had observed him. Cadet Yearn had been assigned to the observation detail in her second year of service, and even now, 106 days later, with the sky falling on the garrison and the gray, a dark shape swelling on the plain, she could not have told anyone what precisely they had learned from all that observing. The boy, his designation in the file was Specimen H9, his name, which he had given them plainly the first hour and which no one in the file ever used, was Kel Arden, had been a disappointment to deep study almost from the start. He was not violent. He did not rage against the transparent wall of the observation suite. He ate what they gave him, slept when the lights dimmed, and spent his waking hours doing the small maintenance rituals of a species that could not sit still. He did a set of physical exercises each morning with a discipline that unsettled the medical staff. He kept the suite fanatically clean, and he talked. That was the thing about the boy that Yearn remembered when everything else had faded. He talked. Not to them at first. They were behind the glass, and behind the glass they answered him with the flat institutional courtesies the protocol allowed and nothing more. But he talked anyway, out loud, to the empty air of the suite, in the low, easy voice of someone keeping company, with a presence the room did not contain. For the first month deep study had logged it as distress vocalization, a Deathworld primate's response to isolation, and had recommended a mild sedative regimen that the medical Ashan had refused to administer on the grounds that the boy was not distressed, and it was unethical to sedate a calm creature to make his calm more legible. Yearn had listened to hours of it, the way a young cadet listens to anything she is assigned to listen to, and slowly she had understood that the boy was not talking to no one. He was talking to someone specific. He had a name for the someone, and he used the name the way you use a name you have used 10,000 times, worn smooth as a river stone. He talked to the someone about the food, about the light, about how the exercises were going, about the long, slow business of the days. And every night before the sweet lights went down, he said the same short thing to the empty air in the same low voice, like a man latching a door. "Good boy," the boy said every night to no one deep study could find. "Hold on, I'm all right. Hold on." Yearn had not known then that there was anything on the far side of that latch door. None of them had. It was Cressa Un, arriving 19 days ago with the fleet and the fear and a folder of dispatches, who had put the boy's nightly voice beside the map of the Gray's long walk and gone the color of cold ash. Because the Gray had a heading, and the heading had never once changed. The first dispatch was 206 days old, and it came from a Concorde way station on the far rim of the Talvin Holdings, a small commercial platform that logged the passage of freight and did not expect to log anything else. It logged the creature at the outer moorings, walking. It logged, in the flat verbs of a duty officer, the platform's automated defenses engaging an unidentified apex-class organism that had disembarked from an impounded human hull, and the automated defenses failing, and the creature walking through the mooring concourse without deviating from its line, and departing the platform on the next outbound hull it could reach, which it reached by walking up the loading ramp among the cargo and lying down. The dispatch did not describe an attack. It described a large calm animal crossing a room full of people who were shooting at it, boarding a ship, and going to sleep. The next dispatch was 40 days later and 11 light-years closer to Sethar Reach, and it read the same, and the next, and the next. 11 of them across 200 days, a chain of small conquered installations strung out along a single geodesic like beads on a wire, and the wire pointed at Sethar Reach the way a compass points at a pole, and at every bead the story was identical. The creature arrived aboard whatever hull carried it. The installation panicked and fired. The installation broke. The creature walked through and found the next hull heading the right way and rode it, patient as freight, always closer, always coming. "It is not hunting," Cressa had said, that first night on the Anthithine, spreading the dispatches across Dre's tactical table like a hand of cards she already knew would lose to him and playing them anyway. "Look at the vector. A hunter's path bends toward prey and slackens when the prey is taken. This path does not bend. It has not bent in 200 days. It is not the path of a predator, submartial. It is the path of something coming home. And the home is here. The home has been here in your prefect's observation suite for 106 days, saying, 'Good boy, hold on,' into a room your people swept for listening devices and found empty because they were looking for a device." Dre had not believed her. He had come to Sethar Reach with a fleet because 11 installations were smoking dispatches, and the 11th had been a conquered military depot with 400 souls aboard, and a submarshal who is handed 400 dead does not go looking for the tender interpretation. He had believed in a monster because a monster was a thing you could plan a fleet against. He had spent 19 days and the greater part of a fortress world's munitions on the monster, and now, in the forward gallery with the guns gone cold and Cressa Un's file open on the table in front of him, he made himself read what he had refused to read for 19 days, and it was exactly what she had told him it would be. Specimen H9. Human juvenile, designation Kel Arden, self-reported age 19 standard years, recovered from a human survey wreck. And in the recovered effects, logged and photographed and filed and never once cross-referenced against the thing walking toward the garrison, a single item, a worn strap of earth-tanned leather, cracked and darkened with age and use, with a heavy corroded buckle and a small stamped tag. The tag was human script. Deep Study had translated it in the first week and filed the translation without comment, because it was a companion animal restraint of no research value, the sort of mundane object a Deathworld human might carry for reasons of sentiment. The tag said Bishop, and under the name, in the small worn letters of a thing meant to bring a lost animal home, it said, "If found, he is looking for me." Dre closed the file. "Prefect Sale," he said to the command spine, and his voice had gone very level, the levelness a Vor commander uses in the last quiet moment before he does the thing that ends his career or saves it. "You will prepare the human boy for release. You will do it gently, and you will do it now. And you will pray to whatever your caste prays to that we are not too late to give this creature the one thing in the sector it has walked 200 days to reach, because I have fired everything a fortress is allowed to fire, and it is still coming, and I begin to think it will keep coming through the fortress itself if it must." On the plain, the gray walked, and the shield wall that had never once stopped it stood between it and the boy, and no one in the garrison could say for certain whether the wall was there to keep the creature out or to keep the truth in. The shield wall stopped nothing, but the gate slowed everything, and so the garrison had almost an hour, and in that hour Sethar Reach came apart in every way a fortress can come apart that is not being attacked. The first thing to break was the war beasts. The conquered did not, as a rule, indulge in the Deathworld habit of keeping large predators close, but Sethar Reach was a frontier station in contested drift, and its Vor garrison had, against regulation, maintained a kennel of scarn-bred maulers, low, broad, plated things the color of old blood, bred over 40 generations for the single purpose of holding a breach against anything that came through it. They were the most dangerous animals within 100 light-years, discounting the one on the plain, and the Vormaster-at-Arms had them mustered at the inner gate within minutes of the ceasefire, 40 of them, chained and hooded and howling for the thing they could already smell coming. They stopped howling all at once. Cadet Yearn was at the inner gate when it happened, sent down from the observation deck with a runner's orders she no longer remembered, and she felt it before she understood it. The way a room changes when a very large presence enters it, except nothing had entered. The gray was still a kilometer out past the wall. The maulers went silent between one breath and the next, 40 throats closing together, and then, without any command, without any handler touching them, they lay down. They lay flat, chins to the deck, plated bodies pressed low as they could press, and they did not move again. The Master-at-Arms, a scarred old Vor who had raised the pack himself, went down the line kicking at them and roaring the attack word into their ear holes, and the maulers pressed themselves flatter and would not rise. And one of them, when he seized its harness and hauled, turned its blunt armored head and looked at him with an expression Yearn had never seen on a mauler and would never forget, an expression that on a person she would have called shame, and it whined, high and thin, a sound she had not known the animals could make. "They know," Cressa said. She had come down to the gate on the sub-marshal's authority to see the thing she had been right about, and she stood among the pressed flat maulers with her skin running a slow, reverent gold, and she said it again, to Yearn, to herself, to the file she would never get to finish. "They know what it is. We had to reason our way to it from a leather strap. They knew from a scent on the wind a kilometer off. Every instinct 40 generations of breeding put in these animals is telling them the same thing, and the thing it is telling them is lie down. That one is not for you. That one is senior to everything in this yard, including the ones who think they own you." "Senior how?" Yearn said. Her own voice sounded strange to her. "It's an animal. It's a companion animal. It's the smallest thing in this whole war, scholar. A Vor in plate outmasses it. The sub-marshal outmasses it." "Mass," said Cressa with something that in an Ashan was almost pity, "is not the axis the maulers are measuring on. Neither are you, though you have not admitted it to yourself yet. Watch them. They are not afraid of being killed. A mauler does not know how to be afraid of that. We bred the fear out of them. They are doing the other thing, the older thing, the thing that lives underneath fear. They are yielding rank to an apex they recognize as above them. On a world we have never seen, in a food web we have never charted, that gray old animal was somebody's idea of the top, and the maulers can smell the top on it the way you can smell smoke, and there is not a weapon in this fortress that argues with a nose." Kel Arden had felt the orbital lance come down through the floor of the observation suite, and he had known, the way you know a familiar step in the hall, exactly what it meant. He was sitting on the floor with his back to the transparent wall, which was the only wall in the suite he liked, because it was the only one that faced the plain, and the plain faced the sky, and somewhere under that sky was the thing coming for him. He had been sitting like that for most of 106 days, and in that time he had learned the fortress by its tremors, the way a man born near a rail line learns the trains. He knew the deep, steady hum of the shield generators and the pulse of the Eastern battery in its practice cycles, and the particular sick lurch in his stomach when the whole structure shifted its footing to fire something big. When the lance came down, he felt it in his teeth and in the water glass on the low table and in the soles of his bare feet through the deck, and he put his hand flat on the transparent wall, and he said, out loud, in the low, even voice he had been using every day for 106 days, "Easy. Easy, buddy. Almost there." Behind the glass, on the far side of the suite, the two Ashan of the medical detail exchanged the particular ripple of color that Kel had learned meant they were worried about him again. He had learned a great deal of their color speech over 106 days, more than they knew, because they talked in front of him the way people talk in front of a dog. He had learned that the tall one thought he was brave and the short one thought he was in shock, and that both of them had argued more than once with the ones who gave the orders and lost. He did not hold it against them. They brought him water and they had refused once to put him to sleep when a voice on the speaker told them to. And in 106 days, those two things had come to feel like a great deal. "You keep saying that," the tall Ashen said through the wall speaker in the flat translated Concord that always arrived a half-second behind the ripple of the real words. "Almost there. Almost what H9. There is nothing coming that is good for you. The fleet has cornered the creature on the plane. You understand that the creature and you are the file connects you to the creature. You understand that when it reaches this place, if it reaches this place, it will not know you from any of us. It is not a person. It has walked through a war. Whatever it was to you, it is a killing thing now." Kel almost laughed and stopped himself because it would have frightened them and they had been kind. He kept his hand on the glass. "He's not a killing thing," he said. "He's never killed anything in his life that wasn't a squirrel, and he felt bad about the squirrel. You've got it exactly backwards, and you've had it backwards the whole time, and that's why you're all so scared. You think he came here angry." He turned his head and looked at the tall Ashen through two panes of transparent alloy, this young human with a plain, tired face and 106 days of fortress pallor on him, and he was not angry either, which was the thing they could never account for. "He didn't come here angry. He came here because I'm here. That's the whole of it. That's the only thing he's ever needed a reason for. You took the one person he's got left in the world and you put him behind a wall, and he spent 200 days walking to the wall, and every time somebody shot at him it didn't make him angry. It just made him keep walking, because getting to me was always more important than whatever you were doing to him on the way. That's not a monster. I keep telling you people that's not a monster, and you keep not hearing me, because the truth is worse than a monster. A monster you could kill." He looked back at the plane. "You can't kill loyalty. You've been trying for 200 days. Look how that's going." The short Ashen said something the wall speaker did not translate, and the tall one did not answer, and out on the white plane the shape came on, and Kel Arden put his forehead against the transparent wall and closed his eyes and said, one more time, so quietly the speaker barely caught it, "Almost there. Good boy, almost there." The human liaison had told them all of this 100 days ago, in plain Concord, in a formal session of record, and they had filed her warning the way they filed everything human, carefully, respectfully, and without believing a word of it. Mara Sen was 24, and she was the entire human diplomatic presence at Sethar Reach, a junior liaison from the Earth Accord mission who had been posted to the fortress, because the fortress was quiet, and a junior liaison was all a quiet posting rated. She had learned about Kel Arden the way she learned about most things the Conquered did not want her to know, which was by noticing a shape in the data where a shape should not be. A supply requisition for a deep study observation suite that had been dark for a year, a medical Ashen reassigned without explanation, a repatriation clock for a human survivor that had been started and then quietly stopped. It had taken her a month to confirm that the Conquered was holding a human boy, and another 2 weeks to be allowed to see him, and by the time she stood in the observation gallery and watched a 19-year-old talk in a low, steady voice to a room the Conquered swore was empty, the first dispatch about the Gray had already been filed on the far rim, and Mara Sen had been the only being in the sector with both halves of the picture. She had gone straight to Prefect Sale, and she had not been diplomatic about it, which she regretted later, because being undiplomatic had let him file her as emotional and file the warning with her. "You have to give him back," she had said, "today. Not through the neutral channels, not through the repatriation clock today, before the thing that's coming gets any closer. I know exactly one thing about that boy that your entire deep study branch has missed in 3 months of watching him, and it's the only thing that matters, and it's this: he's a working dog family. You pulled his file, you know where he's from, that's a frontier herding world, and his people have run stock dogs and guard dogs on open range for 6 generations, and the animal in that leather strap photo is a guardian breed, a real one, the kind that Earth built over 1,000 years to stand between a flock and a wolf in the dark and not blink. Do you understand what that means? That is not a pet in the way your file means pet. That is a 4,000-year-old contract. That animal will cross anything, survive anything, walk through anything, to stand between that boy and harm, because standing between that boy and harm is the only thing it was ever for, and right now, in its head, the thing between the boy and safety is you. Sale had folded his slate-purple hands and told her, with genuine and infuriating gentleness, that the conquered did not make policy on the basis of a species folklore about its animals, and that the creature on the dispatches was an apex organism of grave concern that a fleet would resolve in due course, and that her concern for the boy did her credit and was noted. He had used the word folklore. Mara Sen had walked out of his office and filed a formal dissent with the Earth mission and a private message to a Vor sub-marshal she had met once at a border conference, a hard old soldier named Osivant Dre, who had struck her as the rare conquered officer who might change his mind if you put enough dead in front of him, and the private message had said only, "When the animal reaches Sethar Reach, and it will, remember that you were told what it was and you were told by a human, and remember which of us was surprised." The command spine of Sethar Reach did not accept the truth all at once, because command spines never do, and the hour the gate bought them was spent, in large part, on the last convulsions of everyone who could not yet bear to believe that the thing on the plane was a boy's dog. The convulsions took the shape of proposals. Dre stood in the command spine and listened to them come, and there is a particular exhaustion that a commander knows, the exhaustion of watching capable people generate confident plans against a problem they have refused to understand, and Dre was full of that exhaustion by the third proposal. A Talvin weapons officer proposed collapsing the eastern approach with subsurface charges, dropping the creature into a fault 100 meters deep, and sealing it under the crust. Dre asked her what she believed would happen when a thing that had walked through the orbital lance found itself merely buried, and whether she would care to be at the eastern gate when it finished digging. She withdrew the proposal. A Vor from the fleet's own tactical branch proposed pulling every soldier back to the fortress core, sealing the blast doors, and letting the creature exhaust itself against the inner structure. A siege in reverse, the fortress as the animal that outlasts. Dre let him finish and then said, quietly, that a thing which had not tired in 200 days was not going to tire against a door, and that the branch officer had just described, in tactical language, the exact reasoning of 11 dead installations, and would he like to be the 12th? And the branch officer went the gray-green of a Vor who has understood something he would rather not have. They summoned the Mind Toucher, because summoning the Mind Toucher was the last thing on the list. Her name did not matter and Dre never learned it. She was one of the rare Seth whose caste could press a shape of intent into the nervous system of a lower animal, a talent the conquered used sparingly and mostly on its own war beasts, and she had been carried to Sethar Reach on a fast courier against exactly this hour. They set her at a forward observation slit with the creature 400 meters out and closing, and she reached for it. Dre watched her do it, watched the translucent membranes of her face go slack with effort, and she found it, and she came off the slit so hard she cracked the back of her head against the bulkhead and had to be carried away by medical, and the only thing she would say, over and over, in the cracked voice of someone who had put her hand on a stove she had been assured was cold, was that there was nothing in there to turn. "You must understand what I mean," she said to Dre later in the medical bay, gripping his lower wrist with a strength her thin frame should not have had. "I have turned maulers. I have turned things that eat maulers. There is always a place to press, a hunger you can swell, a fear you can bank, a rage you can bend a few degrees off true. Every animal is a set of pressures and every pressure is a handle. I reached into that creature expecting handles and there were no handles. There was one thing, one direction. It was not a hunger and it was not a fear and it was not a rage. It was a want, and the want was so old and so total and so utterly without a second thought that it did not have a surface I could get behind. It is not that the creature is strong-willed, submartial. It is that the creature has, in the place where an animal keeps its several wills, exactly one, and it fills the whole space, and it is pointed at something I could feel but not see, something warm and small and specific, somewhere behind me, inside your walls. I could not turn it any more than you can turn a river by shouting at the water. Give it what it wants. There is nothing else to do. I have touched a great many minds, and I have never touched one that frightened me, and I will resign my caste before I touch that one again, not because it is cruel. It is not cruel. There is not a gram of cruelty in it, but because it made me understand that I have spent my life turning animals that could be turned and calling that mastery, and I was wrong about what I was. Cressa Un, who had been at Dre's shoulder for the whole of it, wrote the mind-toucher's words down in her flat hand and underlined one phrase, and the phrase she underlined was, "There was nothing in there to turn," and she said, half to herself, "That is the most complete thing anyone has said about a human animal in the history of this conquered." And it took us 200 dead days, and a fleet to hear it from a woman with a cracked skull. What the outpost tried to hold it meant, when you read the dispatches the way Cressa had finally made Dre read them, was worse than any attack, and it was the reason the submarshal stopped, somewhere in that hour, being angry at the creature and started being afraid of what his own conquered had done. Take the 11th installation, the one that had made him bring a fleet. Vessel Depot Harran, 400 souls, a hard military post with real weapons and real discipline, not a soft commercial platform. The creature had come to Harran aboard an impounded ore hauler, walked down the ramp, and started across the receiving floor toward the far lock, which happened to face the direction it always faced, the direction that led, 11 light-years on, to Sethar Reach. And the depot commander at Harran, a decorated Vor who had every reason to believe the reports of a rampaging apex predator that had broken 10 installations, had done the correct and disciplined thing. He had sealed the locks. He had trapped the creature on the receiving floor to contain the threat, and he had brought the depot's considerable weapons to bear, and he had ordered his people to hold the line and put the animal down. And the creature, finding the lock sealed in the one direction it needed to go, had tried to get through the lock. That was all. That was the whole atrocity of Harran when you read it clean. 400 souls had died at Vessel Depot Harran not because a monster had hunted them through the corridors, but because 400 souls had stood, with weapons, between a homebound guardian and the only door that led toward the boy. And the guardian had needed to get through the door, and it had gone through the door, and everything that had been welded across the door, and everyone who had been standing in front of it firing was, in the flat language of the physics, in the way. The dispatch that stopped mid-sentence had not stopped, because the writer was being torn apart. It had stopped, Cressa believed, because the writer had realized in his last coherent moment that they had made the one mistake the creature could not forgive. Not a threat to itself, it forgave all of those, but a wall across its road, and that the wall was going to fail, and that failing walls at that scale do not care who is standing near them. It never chased anyone, Cressa said. In 200 days across 11 installations, there is not one dispatch that describes the creature deviating from its line to pursue a fleeing person. Not one. Everyone who died, died in front of a door the creature needed. Everyone who stood aside lived. The soft platforms that opened their locks and let it walk through to the next hull have no casualty reports at all. The creature crossed their concourses like a commuter and boarded its connection and slept. It is the most predictable organism I have ever studied, and it is predictable in the one way we were constitutionally unable to accept, which is that it is not and has never been interested in us. We are scenery. We are, at our very worst, an obstacle. And we brought a fleet to fight scenery, because a fleet is the shape our fear takes, and our fear could not hold the idea that the most dangerous thing in the sector did not know we were alive. While the command spine argued and the mind toucher was carried away, the creature crossed the middle distance, and at ground level the fortress learned what the flagship had learned 200 kilometers up, which was that the worst thing about the Gray was not its power but its ease. Cadet Yearn drew a forward observation slit on the second rotation, a narrow armored embrasure in the outer works with a clean line down the approach, and she watched the creature come the way you watch whether you cannot get indoors from. It was a kilometer out when she took the slit, and it did not seem to be moving quickly, and that was the trick of it, the thing that got into your chest and would not leave. It never seemed to be moving quickly, and it was always closer than it had been the last time you made yourself look. It flowed. That was the only word Yearn could find in her own language for the way the great gray body ate the ground. A low, tireless roll of shoulder and haunch that covered more distance per breath than a running vor, and looked, the whole time, like an old animal in no particular hurry. She timed it once, against the range markers the gunners had laid on the plain, and the number she got made her stop timing it, because the number said the thing would be at the wall before the command spine finished arguing about the wall. Then, 600 meters out, in full view of 9 weapon crews who had been given no order, and had taken the absence of an order as permission to keep their weapons hot, the creature stopped and lay down and rolled. It rolled on its back in the churned dirt of a crater lip, all 4 legs in the air, twisting the way animals twist to scratch a place they cannot reach, throwing up a small cloud of white dust that hung in the noon light. And then it lay there a moment in the sun on its back in the middle of the deadliest killing ground in the sector, entirely at its ease, and Yearn heard down the line of the outer works the sound of a Skarn gun crew coming apart. Not the weapon, the crew. She heard a young gunner's voice climb into a register her species used only twice in a life, at hatching and at death, and she heard the gun captain trying to hold them and failing. And when she looked, she saw the whole crew back away from their piece with their hands open and empty, refusing it, and one of them was down on the deck with its crest flat against its skull, and the thing that had broken them was not that the creature had charged. The thing that had broken them was that it had scratched its back. "You do not understand what you are seeing, so let me tell you," said Cressa-Un, who had come up the outer works behind Yearn on the submarshal's leave, watching through the slit with all 4 eyes, and her skin gone the flat gray of an Ashan past fear and into something colder. That crew has been told for 19 days that they face an apex war organism. They have braced for a charge they could have borne. A charge is a thing that is afraid of you. A charge respects your gun. What they cannot bear is that the organism does not respect the gun. It does not respect them. It lay down in their fire lane and scratched an itch because the itch mattered to it and they did not, and there is no terror in the catalog worse than being beneath the notice of the thing that could end you. We built those guns to make us matter. It just declined the whole premise. Watch, it will get up when it is ready, not when we are ready, when it is ready. The creature got up when it was ready. It came to its feet in one loose heave, shook the dust off in a rolling wave from nose to tail, and went back to walking, and it was 500 meters out now, and closing, and behind it the Skarn crew's abandoned gun stood cooling in the sun with no one willing to touch it. 200 kilometers up, the fleet watched, and the fleet could do nothing, and there is no worse posting in any navy than the deck of a warship that has become an audience. Fleet Captain Osh Venaru held the high station above Sethar Reach in the Ansithine's sister ship, and she had 11 capital hulls under her, and not one thing to do with any of them, because the submarshal had gone quiet and then given a ceasefire and then a stand down, and a fleet captain does not fire 11 capital hulls at a planet her own submarshal is standing on. So she watched the take from the surface optics with her bridge crew crowded silent around the plot. And she watched an animal the size of a supply crawler roll on its back in a conquered killing ground and get up unbothered. And she felt the thing move through her bridge that had been moving through every conquered deck in the sector for 200 days. The thing the political officers were already, in their careful language, calling a morale concern. and which was in plain fact the quiet collapse of a belief the conquered had been built on. The belief was simple, and no one had ever said it aloud because no one had ever needed to, that sufficient force settles any question. It was the floor the whole conquered stood on. You could argue policy and caste and trade above that floor all you liked, but underneath it all was the bedrock certainty that if a thing could not be reasoned with, it could be killed, and that the conquered could always, in the last resort, bring enough. 200 days of dispatches had put a crack in the floor. This morning's fire had widened the crack to a chasm. And now 11 capital hulls hung in the high dark and watched, on every screen, the proof that there was at least one thing in the sector against which no amount of enough was enough. And the proof was a gray old animal with a sorrowful face, scratching its back in the sun. And every officer on every bridge understood that if the conquered's floor could be cracked by a companion animal following its heart across the stars, then the floor had never been what they thought it was. And the things they had done while standing on it looked different now, and would keep looking different for a long time. "Signal from the drift," her communications officer said into that silence. "Human origin, unencrypted, they want us to have it." Venaru read it. It was short. A human relief flotilla, 6 light hulls. A hospital ship, no capital escort. The sort of thing you send to a disaster and not to a war, had translated in at the edge of the Sethar system 4 hours ago and was making unhurried way toward the fortress world. And it had sent in the clear, for anyone who cared to read it, a single line of greeting. And the line of greeting was the most frightening thing Osh Venaru read in the whole affair. More frightening than the surface take. Because it told her that the humans had known all along exactly how this ended. The line said, "We are here to collect our citizen and his dog. Please have them ready. We would prefer to bring them both home unharmed, and we have every expectation that we will." "Dog," Venaru said aloud to her silent bridge, turning the human word over. The small, flat, domestic human word that the translation matrix rendered without ceremony because it was a word without ceremony, a word for a thing so ordinary that humans did not bother to dress it up. "They call it his dog. They sent a hospital ship and no guns, and they call the thing that walked through the submarshal's lance his dog, and they would prefer to bring it home unharmed." She set the message down. "They are not worried it will die. They are worried we will make them unhappy by getting in its way. Helm, take us to the far anchor and hold. I will not have 11 capital hulls in frame when that flotilla arrives to watch a fortress hand a boy his dog. Let the record show we stood back. It is the only decision left to me that history will not laugh at." Down on the surface, Prefect Alund Sale made the last bad decision of the affair, and it very nearly cost everything, and Cadet Yearn had a slit-side view of it. Sale had been relieved of the release order and told to open the suite, and some hard, proud thing in the old Talvin administrator could not go quietly from the fortress being his to the fortress being a stage for his failure. And so, in the 40 minutes between the release order and the boy reaching the yard, Prefect Sale quietly authorized the one system Dre's stand-down had not explicitly named. He powered the perimeter shield wall to full. He told himself it was prudence, a last barrier held in reserve, a governor's due caution, and he did not tell the command spine he had done it. And the wall came up along the eastern gate in a curtain of hardened force 40 meters tall, 40 meters of the one defense the creature had not yet touched. Directly across the road the creature was walking, directly between the animal and the boy, which was, though Sale did not have the frame to know it, the precise and total definition of the one thing the Guardian would not forgive. The ceasefire nearly did not hold, and the being who nearly broke it was not a frightened cadet, but the most decorated gunnery officer on the fortress. And Dre would think about that for a long time afterward, that it was not the young and the raw who could not let go of the war, it was the old and the sure. Battery Master Vool commanded the northern array, the one emplacement the morning's fighting had left fully intact, and Vool had spent 40 years learning the single lesson that a gunnery officer's whole life teaches. which is that there is no target that cannot be serviced if you bring enough energy to bear on a small enough space. And Vool did not have room in 40 years of certainty for a target that had walked through the Eastern Battery and the orbital lance and declined to die. When the stand-down came down the line, Vool read it as the panic of a command spine that had lost its nerve, and Vool did the disciplined, insubordinate, catastrophic thing that a certain kind of veteran does in the last moment of a collapsing belief. Kept the northern array hot, held the creature in its solution as it crossed into range, and 400 meters out, with the stand-down explicit on every channel and Dre's own voice still ringing in the pit, fired. The northern array was a precision weapon, and Vool was the best who had ever run it, and the shot was perfect. It took the creature square, a lance of focused energy that would have cored a gunship, and for the length of a breath the whole plane lit white, and Yearn, at her slit, was certain she had just watched the old dog die, and some traitor part of her was glad, because being glad was easier than the thing she had been feeling all morning. The light cleared. The creature had stopped. It stood in the settling dust with a fresh dark scorch seared along its flank, and it turned its great head slowly, and it looked for the first and only time in the whole affair directly at the thing that had hurt it. It looked up the slope across 400 meters, straight at the northern array, at Vool, and the look was not rage and it was not fear. It was worse than either. It was consideration. The creature considered the northern array the way a laborer considers a wasp that has stung him on the last 100 meters of the walk home, with a flat, weary attention that weighed, visibly, whether the thing was worth the turning aside for, whether Vool's gun rose to the level of an obstacle between it and the boy or remained merely a nuisance on the road. And Yearn watched 200 kilos of Guardian make that calculation about a conquered battery and its crew, and she found she had stopped breathing. Because she understood that they were all, in that moment, one decision away from being reclassified from scenery into wall, and that they none of them wanted to know what the creature did to a wall. Dre knew it too. Dre was already moving. He did not waste a word on Vool. He keyed the northern array's own safety interlock from the command spine and dumped its charge to ground and locked the emplacement dark with the master override. And he did it in the time it took the creature to finish considering, and he came up on the general channel with his voice gone to the flat killing calm of a Vor who has run entirely out of patience, and said, "The next crew that services that target, I will consider to have declared for the target. Battery Master Vool is relieved. Confine him. And someone tell that gunner, when he is confined, that he just fired the best shot of his career into the only thing in this sector that could have answered it and chose not to, and that he is alive to be confined solely because the animal he hit is a better commander than he is, because it looked at his gun and decided his gun was not worth the boy's time. Let him retire on that." On the plane, the creature finished its consideration. It turned its head away from the northern array, dismissing it, filing it, in the end, under nuisance and not under wall, and it put its scorched flank to the whole northern emplacement with a contempt more total than any charge, and it walked on toward the boy, and behind it Vool's perfect shot cooled into just one more crater on a plane full of them. One more entry in the long ledger of everything the conquered had spent to learn that it could not buy the answer to this particular question at any price its guns could pay. Dre read that message again now in the forward gallery, 100 days after she had sent it, and he sent for Mara Sen, and when she came he did the thing his caste found hardest, which was to say, standing in front of a junior officer of a species he had until that morning considered soft, "You were right, liaison, and I was told and I was surprised, and the record will show both." Dre had one question left that the dispatches could not answer, and he put it to the human liaison, because she was the only being at Sethar Reach who could, and because he had learned late to ask humans about human things. "Tell me what it is," he said. "Not the taxonomy. Your deep study branch has the taxonomy, and the taxonomy is useless. Tell me what it is to the boy and to your people so that I understand what I have been shooting at, and so that when it comes through that gate, I do not do the last stupid thing on a very long list of stupid things. Tell me why a companion animal crosses 200 days of fire and does not tire and cannot be turned and forgives everything except a locked door. I am a soldier, liaison. I have kept war beasts. I have loved war beasts. I buried a mauler once that took a lance meant for me, and I grieved it, and I have never once believed a mauler would cross a war to find me. What is different about this one? Maricen was quiet for a moment. Then she sat down across from the old vor, uninvited, which no conquered officer would have done, and she told him, and Cadet Yearn, standing her post by the door, heard all of it, and it was the second thing about the whole affair she never forgot. Where Kel's from, Mara said, is a place called Dovetail. It's a herding world, cold, high, open range, a colony that went out 3 or 4 generations back and never got rich and never much wanted to. His family runs stock on the eastern shelf, thousands of head across ground too broad to fence, in weather that'll kill you if you sit down in it. And there are things on the Dovetail Range that hunt the herds at night, real things, big and fast and patient, that came with the world and don't much care that the world has people on it now. And the way you keep a flock alive on open range against that, the way people have kept flocks alive on open range against that for 4,000 years, back to Earth, back before Earth had anything you'd call a civilization, the way you do it isn't a fence and it isn't a gun. It's a dog. Not a herding dog, that's a different animal, that's the one that moves the flock. I mean the other one, the guardian. My people bred them for it across 40 centuries, and they didn't breed them to be fast or clever or obedient. They bred them for exactly one trait, and they bred everything else out of the way to get it. And the trait is this. The dog decides in its first year that a particular set of living things is its own, and after that it will place its body between those living things and any harm in the universe calmly, without being asked, without being trained to, without any expectation of reward or any concept of retreat for the rest of its life. That's it. That's the whole animal. It isn't loyalty the way you'd give a medal for, it's loyalty the way water is wet. You can't train it in and you can't train it out. It picks its flock and then it is the wall, and it stays the wall until it dies, and there is no force in nature that Dovetail has ever found that will make one of them step aside from something it's decided to guard. Cold won't. Hunger won't. A whole pack of night hunters won't. That's the point of it. That's what it's for. The whole design brief stands against the thing that outnumbers and outweighs it and does not lose its nerve. Bishop's one of those. And here's the part your deep study branch could never have gotten from a file, the part you have to be from a working dog family to understand in your bones. When Kel was born, Bishop was already on the place, a young dog, and somewhere in that first year Bishop looked at the whole Arden household, the stock, the family, the baby. And he sorted it all out the way his kind do, what's mine and what's mine to guard, and he put the baby at the center of it. Kel grew up with 200 pounds of guardian sleeping across his door, learned to walk with a hand on that dog's back. There are pictures, the whole family's got them, everybody on Dovetail's got them, of a toddler asleep in the tall grass a mile from the house with a night coming on. And the reason nobody panicked is there's a gray shape lying around him like a wall, facing out. And as long as that shape is there, the child is the safest thing on the planet. Because between that child and the dark is an animal that 4,000 years built for precisely this, and that will not move, will not sleep, will not fail. Until the child is safe, or the dog is dead. That's what you've been shooting at, Sub-Marshal. You want to know why it doesn't tire and can't be turned and forgives everything except a wall. It's because you took its flock. You reached into the one thing in the universe that animal exists to protect, and you took the child, and you put him behind a wall on a fortress a fleet couldn't reach. And then, this is the part I need you to really hear, then you did the thing. You became, in the only frame that animal has ever had or will ever have, the night hunters. You became the thing between the child and safety. And a guardian doesn't rage at the night hunters and it doesn't fear them. It just comes at a walk, because it has somewhere to be, and the somewhere is between you and the child, and it comes through cold and hunger and a pack that outweighs it, because that is the entire animal, that is the 4,000-year contract, and you cannot shoot it out of a dog any more than you can shoot the wet out of water. 11 installations found that out. You brought a fleet to argue with it. You've been losing an argument with love the whole time and calling it a war. Dre did not speak for a long moment. The command spine hummed around them. Out on the plain, 400 meters closer than it had been when Mara started talking, the gray walked. "The tag," Dre said finally, "on the strap. It says the animal is looking for him, as if the boy wrote it, as if he knew." "He did know," Mara said. "That's the last thing, and then I'll stop, and you'll do whatever you're going to do. Every kid on a working dog world learns to write that tag before they can spell their own address, because the one thing everyone on those worlds understands is that if the two of you are ever separated, the dog will come. Not might. Will. It's not a hope, it's a fact about the animal you plan your whole life around. So you put the tag on the collar, and the tag doesn't say if found, return to owner, because that's got it backwards, and every rancher's child knows it's backwards. The dog isn't the property that got lost. The dog is the one doing the looking. Kel wrote if found. He is looking for me on that collar when he was 6 years old in a child's hand, and then he grew up, and the survey berth came up, and he took the strap with him the way you take a photograph, and his ship came apart in your drift, and your picket pulled him out and left the wreck, and somewhere in the wreck or on the hull or God knows where was 200 pounds of guardian that woke up to find its flock gone, and read the only law it's ever known, and started walking. And it has been walking ever since, and it will not stop, because the tag is true. He is looking for him. He has been looking for him for 200 days. And he's 400 meters away, and closing, and I am begging you, Sub-Marshal, do not put one more wall between them, because you've seen what he does to walls, and the boy is on the far side of the next one. Now help me not make it worse, Dre said. You have told me what the creature is. Tell me how to give it what it wants without 100 of my people dying in the handoff." Mara Sen looked at the old Vor for a long moment, and whatever else she had rehearsed on the way down she set aside. "You stop treating it like a handoff," she said. "There's no negotiation here, Sub-Marshal, there's no exchange. You don't have anything it wants except one thing, and the thing isn't yours to bargain with, it's a person. You bring Kel out. You bring him out into the open, in the sun, where the animal can see him and he can see it, and then you get every soldier you have as far from the two of them as you can, and you take your hands off your weapons, all of them, because that animal has walked 200 days through weapons, and the only thing that's kept this from being a massacre is that nothing you've done has read to it as a threat to the boy. Fire one more shot near Kel in the open and it will read, and you do not want it to read. Do you understand me? Everything you have done to it, it has forgiven, because it was between it and me was all that mattered. Sorry." She caught herself, her voice gone thick, and started again flat. "Because getting to him was all that mattered. But the one thing 4,000 years built that animal to answer is a threat to the boy in front of its own eyes, and that is the one thing you have never done, because he's been behind your glass. Bring him into the open and keep your guns down, and you will all live. Bring him into the open and flinch, and you'll wish you'd kept firing the lance." Dre gave the orders, all of them. He was a sub-marshal of the conquered, and he had spent 19 days in a Fortress World's arsenal being wrong, and there is a kind of soldier who, having been that wrong, spends the rest of himself being exactly right, and Ossivant Dre discovered in the last hour of the affair that he was that kind. He ordered the weapons safed and locked, and the crews withdrawn from the yard. He ordered the maulers taken back to their kennel, which was unnecessary, because the maulers had not moved and would not move. He ordered Prefect Sale to release specimen H9 into the eastern yard, in the sun, and when Sale began to speak of protocol, Dre told him, in the register that was not to be discussed, that the protocol had killed 400 souls at the 11th installation, and would not be permitted to kill anyone at the 12th, and that the prefect could either open the suite or be relieved and confined while someone else opened it, and that Dre did not much care which. Sale opened the suite. They brought Kel Arden down through the fortress on foot, because the lifts had been shut down against the tremors, and Cadet Yearn was part of the escort, and for the rest of her life she would measure other walks against that one. The boy did not hurry and he did not drag. He walked between two rows of Vor guards with his bare feet silent on the cold deck, and his fortress-pale face turned up toward the light as they climbed toward the yard. And he was, Yearn realized, the calmest living thing in the fortress that was not already lying flat in the kennel. The guards around him were not calm. They were the elite of the garrison, warriors in full plate who had held breaches in 3 border wars, and they walked that boy toward the yard with the stiff, careful gait of people carrying something that might go off, and the something was not the boy. The something was out past the wall, and every one of them knew it. Yearn walked at the boy's shoulder because that was her place in the formation, and after a while, without looking at her, in a low voice pitched under the ring of the guard's boots, the boy spoke to her. "You're the young one," he said. "The gray and brown one. You've been on the glass since the start. You used to hum." He said it kindly. "I could hear you a little when the speaker was open. You'd hum when you thought no one was on the deck. I liked it. It got quiet in there some days." Yearn did not know what to say. Cadets of the Skarn line were not built for the thing that was happening in her chest. "I'm sorry," she said finally, because it was true and because there was nothing else. "For all of it, for the days. I didn't decide it, but I was there for it and I'm sorry." "I know you didn't decide it," Kel said. "The ones who decide it never come to the glass." He walked a few steps. The light was getting stronger ahead, the raw white noon light of the open yard leaking down the ramp. "Can I tell you something before we go up there? Because you were kind and you should know, so you're not scared when it happens." He glanced at her, and his plain young face had something in it she could not name, something old and steady that did not belong on someone 19 years alive. "When he comes into that yard, everybody's going to think it's the most dangerous moment of their lives. And they're going to be wrong, the same way they've been wrong the whole time. It's the safest moment any of you have had since he crossed your border. Because up till now you've had a scared animal walking toward the one thing it loves through everything you could throw at it. And in about 10 minutes you're going to have that same animal with the one thing it loves finally in reach and calm and safe, and there is nothing in this galaxy gentler than a guardian who's finally home. You just have to not shoot him in the last 100 meters, that's all. That's the only way any of this goes wrong now. Tell them for me. Don't shoot him in the last 100 meters. They came up the ramp into the light, and the yard opened out ahead of them, wide and white and cratered, its far side a broken shield wall and a gate standing open on the plain. And out on the plain, close now, close enough that Yearn could see the gray of its muzzle and the slow roll of its shoulders, and the patient, sorrowful set of its great blunt head, the gray walked the last kilometer home. It reached the wall while they were still positioning the boy, and the wall was the last thing anyone at Sethar Reach ever tried to use to stop it, and it did not so much stop the wall as declined to notice it. Nobody on the command spine had ordered the wall raised. Dre's stand-down had emptied the yard and cooled the guns and named every system to be safed, and it had not named the perimeter shield, because it had not occurred to the sub-marshal that anyone would raise a barrier across the road after everything the day had taught them. And so Prefect Sale's quiet private act went unnoticed on the plot, until the curtain of force was already 40 meters tall across the eastern gate. And by then Dre had a boy walking toward that gate, and no time to bring the wall down, without the generators failing dirty and throwing arc into the yard. The one defense the gray had not yet touched now stood across the one road the gray was walking, which was the single configuration in the universe that 4,000 years had built the animal to answer. And it stood there because an old administrator could not bear to be the fortress's failure and had reached, in his last proud moment, for the exact wrong lever. The gray walked up to the shield wall and stopped and looked at it. For a moment it seemed the wall had done what the whole arsenal could not, and Yearn, watching from the edge of the yard, felt a treacherous flare of hope because the thing had stopped. And then she understood, the way she was learning to understand everything about the creature a half-second after it was too late to matter, that it had not stopped because the wall was in its way. It had stopped because the boy was not yet in the yard, and it was waiting, and while it waited it was regarding the wall the way an old laborer regards a locked door at the end of a long shift, not as an enemy, not even as an obstacle, but as one last small stupid inconvenience between him and the end of the day. Then Kell Arden stepped out into the open yard, into the white noon light, alone, 100 meters of cratered ground between him and the wall, and he lifted one hand. And he did not shout. The boy never once shouted in the whole affair. He only said it in the low, even voice that had carried across 106 days, and Yearn would come to believe, across 200 days and 11 light years before that. The voice a working dog family uses for the animal that has kept its side of a 4,000-year contract. Bishop here. The gray went through the shield wall. It did not batter it or blast it or tear it. It simply walked into the curtain of force that was rated to turn a cruiser's broadside, and the curtain flared white where the great gray body met it, and the generators along the wall screamed up through their whole range and into failure, and the wall came apart in a cascade of dying light, 40 meters of hardened force unspooling into sparks and gone, and out of the collapse walked the gray, unhurried, into the eastern yard of Sethar Reach. And it did not look at the wall it had just ended or the soldiers frozen along the yard's edge or the fortress that had spent a war trying to kill it. It looked at the boy. It had crossed 200 days to look at the boy, and now it looked at the boy, and it began, at last, to run. Every weapon in the eastern yard came up. It was reflex, the deepest reflex a soldier has, the one that fires below thought when a thing the size of a supply crawler breaks a wall and breaks into a run toward a body you are meant to protect, and 40 Vor in full plate and a dozen Skarn gunners and the crews on the outer works all brought their weapons up together in a single clattering wave. And Cadet Yearn, who had no weapon, felt her own hands come up empty in the same reflex. And for one hinge of a second, the whole affair balanced on the edge it had been walking toward for 200 days, because Mara Sen had been exactly right. Everything the creature had forgiven, it had forgiven because nothing had read as a threat to the boy. And now the boy stood alone in the open with 100 armed soldiers around him, and a wall of raised weapons swinging to track the gray shape closing on him at a dead run. And if one of those weapons fired, if one frightened gunner's hand closed, the creature would have, at last, in front of its own eyes, the one thing 4,000 years had built it to answer, and there would not be enough left of Sethar Reach to file a dispatch. "Hold," Dre said, on every channel at once, in the register that was not to be discussed, and under it, small and clear across the open yard, the boy's voice, not raised, never raised, saying the thing he had been saying to an empty room for 106 days, saying it now to the thing the room had never contained. "Easy, easy, buddy, I'm here. I'm here." Nobody fired. Yearn never learned whether it was Dre's order or the boy's voice, or simply that every soldier in the yard in the last half-second saw the same thing she saw and could not square it with the trigger, because what came through the broken wall at a run was not a war beast closing on a kill. It was an old dog that had found its boy. The distinction is not one a gun can make, and it is not one a soldier is trained to make, but it is one that every living thing in that yard made at once, in the body below thought, because the creature's whole shape had changed in the instant it saw the boy. The patient, sorrowful weight it had carried across 200 days was gone. It ran the way a young dog runs, the way it must have run to that toddler in the tall grass a lifetime ago. All that terrible, unstoppable mass turned suddenly and entirely to joy, ears back, mouth open, And the sound it made, the first sound it had made in the whole affair, the first sound 11 installations and a fleet had ever gotten out of it, was not a roar. It was a whine. High and broken and desperate with love, the sound a dog makes in the last 10 meters before it reaches the one it has been grieving, and it went through the yard like a blade. And Yearn saw a Vor warrior in full plate lower his weapon and turn his face away because he could not watch it. And she understood that the sound had told them all, in a language older than the conquered, older than speech, exactly and finally what they had done. The gray reached the boy, and the boy went down. He went down the way you go down under 100 kilos of dog that has no more idea of its own size in that moment than a puppy does, folded up and driven backward into the dirt of the yard. And for an instant the raised weapons twitched again, and then they saw it. They all saw it. And no gun in the history of the conquered was ever pointed at anything more harmless. The creature that had walked through an orbital lance stood over the fallen boy with its huge gray head down, and it was not doing the thing 100 armed soldiers had braced their whole nervous systems for. It was pressing its face against him. It was pushing its blunt, scarred muzzle into his neck and his chest and his hair, frantic and gentle at once, snuffing him over from crown to heel the way a mother does a returned child, checking. Is it you? Is it really you? Are you whole? Are you hurt? And the boy had both arms wrapped around as much of the great neck as he could reach and his face buried in the dusty fur and his shoulders were shaking. And the only words anyone in the yard could make out, muffled and broken, were the boy saying over and over into the dog's neck, good boy, you found me. I knew you'd find me. Good boy. And 200 kilometers up, and along the outer works, and in the command spine, and on 11 capital bridges in the high dark, and in the medical bay where a mind-toucher lay with a cracked skull, the entire assembled might of the Sethari conquered watched a boy and his dog lie tangled together, weeping in the dirt of a fortress the dog had crossed a war to reach, and not one being among them could find, anywhere in the whole architecture of their fear, the monster they had brought a fleet to kill. Then the gray stood, and it turned, and it looked at them, and it bowed. Cressa saw it first from the outer works because she had been watching for it, not the bow. She had not known there would be a bow, but the turn, the moment the creature would remember the rest of the world existed, and she had braced for that moment as the truly dangerous one. The instant a guardian with its charge finally safe might at last account for the 100 armed things that had stood in its road. She had her recorder up. She caught all of it. It became, in time, the single most studied fragment of imagery in the conquered's possession, and Cressa spent the rest of her career refusing to let anyone caption it, because every caption anyone proposed was smaller than the thing. The gray got its feet under it and rose off the boy, and the boy sat up in the dirt with one hand fisted in the fur of the great shoulder and did not let go, and the creature stood a moment over him, and then it lifted its head and swept its gaze across the eastern yard, across the 40 Vor and the dozen scarn and the broken shield wall and the cooling guns and the whole ring of armored things that had spent 19 days trying to end it. And there was in that gaze none of the wariness a cornered predator shows, and none of the hatred a wronged thing shows, and none of the triumph a victor shows. There was only a long, level, unhurried regard, the regard of something taking a full and final measure of a room, and Cressa, who had studied the eyes of 1,000 animals across 40 worlds, felt her recorder shake in her hand, because she had never once been looked at like that, and she understood that she was being looked at by the actual apex of the actual death world, the thing at the top of a food web that had produced humans as a side effect, and that it had decided, for reasons of its own. In a moment it did not owe to anyone to acknowledge them. The great gray head lowered, the heavy shoulders dipped. The creature stretched its forelegs out along the dirt and brought its chest and its chin down toward the ground in a slow, deliberate fold, deliberate as ceremony, unmistakable as language, an animal that had walked through everything the conquered could throw, and had not so much as inclined its head to any of it, now lowering its whole front to the dirt of the yard in the oldest gesture there is. And it held the fold a moment, chin down, eyes up, the sorrowful old face turned toward the ring of soldiers. And then it turned its head and laid its jaw, with enormous care, across the boy's knees and looked up at him and was still. And Cadet Yearn, who was young and who had been kind, and who would carry this for the rest of a long life, understood the bow the way you understand a thing you will never be able to explain to anyone who was not there. It was not surrender. Nothing that had walked through an orbital lance was surrendering to a yard full of cooling guns. It was not gratitude, because they had earned no gratitude. She thought later that the closest word in any language she had was the one Mara Sen used when Yearn finally asked her, weeks after, what the creature had meant by it, and Mara had thought a long time and said, "It wasn't bowing to them. Look where its chin ends up. It bows, and then it lays its head on the boy. It's a play bow, Yearn, half of it anyway. It's the thing a dog does to say the fight's over, the game's changed, come down here and be easy. And the other half is just an old dog too tired to stand, finally lying down where it's been trying to lie down for 200 days, which is next to him. Everybody in that yard thought it was bowing to them, and everybody in that yard felt like they'd been knighted by something out of Scripture, and the truth is gentler and it's harder to live with both. It wasn't for them at all. It was telling 100 armed soldiers the same thing the boy had been telling them for 100 days, and they wouldn't hear. It's over, put it down, come and be easy. There was never a war here. It only looked like a war from your side. The bow reached farther than the yard, because by then the whole sector was watching, and the reveal did not land the same on any two of them, which is how you know a thing is true and not staged. A lie lands the same on everyone, and the bow landed differently on every soul it touched. In the medical bay, the mind-toucher came up off her cot with a cry. She had been lying with her cracked skull in the dim, refusing to reach for the creature again, and she had not needed to reach for it, because at the moment the great head went down in the yard she felt the thing she had touched and could not turn, the single want, the one total direction with no surface to get behind. She felt it arrive. That was the only word she had for it afterward, and she used it for the rest of her life. It arrived. The want that had filled the whole space where an animal keeps its several wills, the want she had been unable to bend by so much as a degree, reached its object at last and resolved, all at once, into something she had no training to name, a vast and settling quiet. The psychic equivalent of a held breath finally let go, and it went through her cracked and open mind like warm water, and she wept on her cot in the dim, a Seth who had turned things that ate maulers. Undone entirely by the feeling of a dog getting home. On the bridge of the sister ship at the far anchor, Fleet Captain Osh Venaru watched the surface take with 11 capital hulls cold behind her, and a bridge crew gone silent around the plot, and she saw the bow. And she heard, over the open channel from the surface, the sound the creature had made in the last 10 meters, the whine, the high broken sound of love in a hurry. And she watched hardened officers who had crewed capital weapons through 3 border wars turn their faces from the screens. And she did not order them to compose themselves, because she could not have managed it herself. She had come to Sethar Reach prepared to grieve a fleet's worth of dead against a monster. She had not been prepared for this, for the specific unbearable thing of watching the most dangerous organism in the sector lay its head across a boy's knees and go still. And understanding, in the same instant every soul on every bridge understood it, that the fleet had been the monster all along, that they had built the killing thing between two people who loved each other, and then spent 200 days firing at the love for failing to die. And in the yard, a Vor warrior named Sethan Ka, who had held the eastern line in 3 wars and buried more of his own than he could count and had not wept since he was a hatchling, stood over his grounded weapon with the safety still warm under his hand, and watched the boy weep into the old dog's neck. And he thought of a mauler he had buried once that had taken a lance meant for him, and how he had told himself that the animal's love was a smaller thing than his own, because it was an animal's. And how he had believed that for 40 years, and how he did not believe it anymore, would never be able to believe it again, because he had just watched an animal's love walk through everything his whole species could build and lie down gentle in the dirt. And he understood that he had spent his life ranking loves by the size of the thing that felt them, and that he had had it exactly backward, and that the largest love he had ever seen lived in the smallest and plainest creature in the yard, and had crossed a war to prove it, and asked nothing in return but a boy's hand in its fur. Sethun-Ka set his weapon down in the dirt and left it there, and he never took up another, and when they asked him why later, he said only that he had seen the thing a weapon was for arguing with, and lost the taste for the argument. Osivant Dre came down into the yard himself, on foot, alone, with his hands open and his weapons left in the command spine, because there are moments a commander cannot delegate, and this was the largest of his life. He crossed the cratered ground slowly, past the ring of his own soldiers who had lowered their weapons and now stood in the loose, stunned postures of people who have been let off a thing they had braced to die for, and he came to a halt at what he judged to be a respectful distance from the boy and the dog, and he lowered himself, an old Vor in full plate creaking down onto one knee in the dirt, to put his eyes nearer the level of theirs. The gray watched him come. It did not rise. Its jaw stayed across the boy's knees, and its eyes tracked Dre the whole way in, unhurried, and Dre felt the weight of that regard settle on him, and understood that he was being permitted, that the animal had made a judgment about him in the first 3 steps, and the judgment was that he could approach, and that the judgment could be revised. "I am the one who fired on you," Dre said. He said it to the dog. He did not entirely know why. It was not a thing the animal could understand, and it was not strictly a thing a sub-marshal said. But he had knelt in the dirt of his own fortress in front of the thing that had broken his certainty, and the truth wanted saying, and so he said it. "For 19 days, everything I had, I take the weight of it. Not the boy, I did not know about the boy until this morning, and that is its own failure, and I take that too, but you, I fired on you knowing only that you would not stop, and I called you a monster because I could not afford for you to be anything else. I was wrong. I have been a soldier a long time, and I have been wrong before, but never so large and never in front of so many, and I find I am not sorry to have it seen. Someone should have been made to see it. I am glad it was me." The boy, Kel Arden, filthy, tear-streaked, one hand still buried in the dog's ruff, looked at the old Vor for a moment, and then he did a thing that Dre carried to the end of his days. He reached out with his free hand slowly, and he laid it flat on the top of the great gray skull between the ears, and he said quietly, "It's all right. He knows you're all right now. Watch." And he moved his hand from the dog's skull toward Dre, a small gesture, an invitation, and the gray followed the hand with its eyes, and then when the boy said, "Lo, go on. Say hello." Gently, the enormous animal stretched its neck out across the dirt and pressed its blunt, scarred nose, once, with a delicacy that stopped Dre's breath, against the back of the sub-marshal's plated hand, and then withdrew it, and laid its head back down on the boy's knees and sighed. Dre looked at the place on his gauntlet where the nose had touched. There was a smear of dust on the plate. He did not clean it off for a long time. "He forgives easy," Kel said. "Always has. It's the thing about them nobody believes till they see it. All that armor, all that not stopping, and underneath it he's the softest animal you ever met, and the 2 things aren't opposites, they're the same thing. He'd walk through your whole fleet again tomorrow if you took me, and he'd let your youngest cadet take a treat out of his mouth with her bare hand tonight, and there's no contradiction in him about it at all. The hardness was never for its own sake. It was only ever the shape love takes when something gets between it and what it loves. You take yourself out from between us." He tipped his head at the broken wall, at the cooling guns, at the whole failed apparatus of the fortress, "and there's nothing left in him but the soft part. That's all that's left now. Look at him. He's already half asleep." The gray was, in fact, half asleep. Its eyes had gone to slits in the noon sun. Its breathing had lengthened and deepened into the slow bellows of an old dog at rest. And Cadet Yearn, standing at the edge of the loose ring with the rest of the stunned garrison, watched the most dangerous organism in the sector drift toward a nap in the dirt with its head on a boy's knees, and found that her face was wet, and did not care. What unmade the garrison in the end was not the power, it was the ordinariness that came after. They had braced across 19 days for a monster, and a monster they could have survived in their souls, because a monster confirms the world. A monster is a big, dangerous thing, and you fight it and win or lose, and the shape of the universe holds. What they could not survive, what rearranged something permanent in every being who stood in that yard, was watching the boy get up out of the dirt, stiff and filthy, and simply begin to take care of his dog, the way he must have 1,000 mornings on a cold, hurting world, as though the whole affair, the fleet, the lance, the 200 days had been a long, bad walk home, and now they were home and there were chores. He checked the dog over first. He ran his hands down each of the great legs in turn, feeling the joints, and the gray lay and let him, lifting each paw as he asked for it. And Yearn realized with a lurch that the boy was checking for injury, that this child was worried, actually worried, that his animal might have been hurt crossing the thing that had failed to hurt it, and that the worry was not performance. It was the plain reflex of someone who has spent his life responsible for a body larger than his own. He found the scorch across the shoulders where the orbital lance had washed over it, and he went very still, and he bent close and parted the singed fur with his fingers, and under it the skin was whole, reddened, dusty, unbroken, the coat crisped away in a stripe, but the great body beneath it sound, the way it had come sound through everything else. The boy let his breath out. Then he looked up once across the yard and found Dre, and did not say anything, and did not have to. And Dre, kneeling in the dirt, bowed his own head, because he had aimed the heaviest thing a fortress carried at this animal, and all it had cost the animal was a stripe of burned fur it had not bothered to notice. And somehow that was worse than a wound, that the whole of his arsenal had amounted, on the body of the thing itself, to a singe the dog would shed by winter. Then the boy asked for water, and it was Cadet Yearn who brought it. She did not decide to. She was simply moving before the request finished, a young scarn with a field canteen crossing the open yard toward the sleeping apex of a dead world food web, because a filthy human child had said, to no one in particular, "He needs water, he wouldn't have stopped to drink enough, he never does when he's working." And something in Yearn had answered the way the whole yard was learning to answer that low, even voice. She knelt and held out the canteen, and the boy took it and looked at her and smiled, tired, and said, "The one who hums." "Thanks," and he cupped his hand and poured the water into his palm and held it under the great muzzle, and the gray roused enough to drink from his hand, long, slow laps, its eyes half open and fixed on the boy the whole time. And Yearn knelt a body's length from a mouth that had come through a shield wall and felt no fear at all, only a vast and aching privilege. And when the canteen was empty, the boy handed it back, and the dog licked the last of the water off his fingers, and the boy laughed, wet and cracked, and wiped his hand on his filthy shirt, and it was the most human sound Yearn had ever heard. "You people," Kel said, not unkindly, looking around the ring of enormous armored beings who stood frozen watching a boy give a dog a drink as though it were the birth of a star, "you really did think he was a weapon." He shook his head slowly. "He's a dog. He's just a dog. That's the part you can't get your heads around, and I understand it now. I didn't at first. You kept looking for the thing that made him able to do it, the trick, the engine, the weapon part, and there isn't one. And that's what's got you all standing there like the sky fell. There's no weapon part. It's just a dog that loves a boy, all the way down, with nothing held back and nothing left over. And it turns out that when you build an animal to love like that on a world that tried for 1 billion years to kill everything on it, love like that is the hardest thing in the galaxy, and none of you had ever seen it, so you thought it had to be a monster. It's not a monster. It's the opposite of a monster. You just never met the opposite of a monster before, so you didn't have a name for it, so you shot at it." He rested his hand on the sleeping dog's flank on the rise and fall of it. "His name's Bishop. He's 13. He likes to sleep in the sun." You can put that in your file. The human flotilla came down through the noon sky 4 hours later, 6 light hulls and a white hospital ship, unhurried, with no weapons run out, and it landed in the open plain beyond the broken wall as casually as a supply run. And the manner of its arrival told the conquered more than any speech could have, because you do not land a hospital ship in the open, under the guns of a fortress that has spent the morning firing an orbital lance, unless you are entirely certain that nothing here is going to hurt you, and the humans were entirely certain, and they were right. Dre met them at the edge of the yard. He had thought a long time about how to meet them, an old vore who had knelt in the dirt already once that day, and in the end he met them the only way that was left, which was as himself, plated and scarred and beaten, with the truth of the morning written all over the wreckage behind him and no attempt made to hide any of it. The human delegation crossed the plain on foot from their grounded ships, a dozen of them, and at their head walked a woman of middle years with gray coming into her hair and a plain traveling coat, and the unbothered gait of someone arriving somewhere she has arrived many times before. And she looked at the broken shield wall, and the cratered plane, and the cooling guns, and the glassed belt of the approach, and the whole vast expensive ruin of a fortress world's arsenal. And the first thing she said to the sub-marshal of the Sethari conquered, in mild and faintly weary conquered, was, "All this, for the two of them. Oh, you people." Her name was Envoy Harlan Ray. Dre would get it properly later. In the moment it did not matter, and she was the senior human authority for the whole contested drift, and she had come herself, which the conquered's political officers would spend months trying to decode and never would, because they kept looking for the strategic reason a senior envoy would attend a border incident in person, and there was no strategic reason. There was only that a citizen and his dog had been in trouble, and the humans had a rule about that which they did not consider negotiable and did not consider grand. And Harlan Ray had come the way you go yourself to collect family from a bad situation, because sending someone junior would have been rude. "We told you," she said to Dre, not sharply, almost gently, the way you correct a child who has hurt himself doing a thing he was warned against. "Liaison Sen told your prefect 100 days ago in plain language in a session of record. Give the boy back. That was the whole of the thing you had to do. Give the boy back through the channels the way the accords say, and none of this happens. No wall, no lance, no dispatches that stop mid-sentence, no fleet, no 400 dead at your depot." 400, sub-marshal. I read the Harran manifest on the way in. 400 of your own people, because your prefect wanted to study a human child a while longer and could not imagine that the child had someone who would come for him. She looked past Dre, into the yard, to where the boy sat in the dirt with his sleeping dog, and something in her weary face eased. "We are not a mighty people, by your measures. We know what we look like next to a conquered fleet. We have fewer ships and thinner hulls, and we lose the exchanges when there are exchanges. But there is a thing about us your deep study branch has in its files and has never once believed, because it cannot be weaponized and it cannot be bought and it does not scale the way your strategists need things to scale, and it is simply this: we do not leave our own, not our people, not our animals. Not the old dog on the porch and not the boy on the survey berth. You took one of ours and you put a wall around him, and you found out what every species finds out about us sooner or later, always the hard way, always at a cost that appalls them, that the wall does not matter, that there is no wall, we will come. And if we cannot come in time," she nodded once, toward the sleeping gray shape in the yard, and her voice did not change at all, "then something we made, something we raised on a hard world to love the way we love, will come in our place, and it will not be as reasonable as we are, and it will not stop to file dissents, and it will walk through your fleet at a stroll because getting to the boy is the only thing it has ever been for. You did not fight a monster this morning, sub-marshal. You fought the shape of a promise, ours, kept by a 13-year-old dog because we were 4 hours too far away to keep it ourselves. Be glad it was the dog that reached him first and not us. The dog forgives. Prefect Alund's Sale was not in the yard to hear it. Prefect Sale was in the command spine under guard, relieved by Dre's order the moment the dust settled, and he would spend the coming cycle explaining to a conquered tribunal how a research directive and a repatriation clock and a private decision to raise a wall had cost 400 lives at Haran and very nearly cost every soul at Sethar Reach, and the tribunal would not be gentle, and Dre, called to testify, would be gentle only in this: that he would say, under oath, that the prefect's first sin was not cruelty, but a failure of imagination, an inability to conceive that the small, warm creature behind his glass could be loved so completely by anything that the love would cross the stars to prove it, and that this particular failure was not the prefect's alone but the whole Concord's, and that if they hanged Sale for it, they would be hanging a man for a blindness they had all shared until the morning a dog cured them of it. But that was later. In the yard in the noon light, the reckoning was quieter, and it belonged to the young. Mara Sen had come out to stand with the delegation, and Envoy Ray put a hand on her shoulder and said, "Lo, you filed the dissent. It's in the record. When this goes to the councils, and it will, your dissent is the thing that says a human saw it coming and said so in time. That matters. You were 24 and posted to a quiet nothing, and you saw the whole shape of it from one leather strap, and you told them, and they wrote folklore in the margin. Remember that you were right when it was expensive to be right and cost you nothing to be quiet. Most people never get the chance to find out which one they are. You found out young." And Mara Sen, who had spent 100 days being filed as emotional by beings twice her age and 4 times her mass, put her face in her hands and let herself, finally, for a moment, not be composed, and no one in the delegation thought less of her for it, because they were human, and they knew what 100 days of being right and unheard does to a person, and they let her have the moment, and then they gave her work to do, because work is the other thing humans give each other. And it is a kindness too. Cressa Un came to the boy on the second afternoon of the delegation's stay, with her recorder in her flat, careful hand, meaning to establish the timeline, how the animal had survived the wreck, how it had crossed the drift, how a warm-blooded companion organism had endured vacuum and cold, and 200 days of transit no unaltered creature should have endured. She got her timeline. She also got the thing that unmade the last of her professional composure, which was the boy's certainty, offered without drama, as plain fact, the way you would state your own name. "He was on the cutter with me," Kell said. They were on a low wall in the golden slant of the fortress light, the dog asleep in the warm dust at their feet, and the boy spoke without heat, running a hand idly down the sleeping animal's spine. "You wouldn't birth without him if he was yours. Nobody from a working world would. When the reactor let go, I was aft and he was forward, and the hull came apart between us, and your picket came in and pulled the warm body off the wreck, that's me, and logged the wreck as a total loss and left it, because why would you salvage a dead frontier cutter? And they never knew there was anything forward because they weren't looking, because who brings a dog on a survey berth?" He said it without accusation. "So they took me and left him, in the wreck, in the cold. And here's the part your file couldn't hold, scholar, the part I need you to actually write down. I was not afraid for him. I want you to understand that, because it's the whole thing. I woke up in your picket's hold alone, with the cutter gone and him God knows where in the dark behind me, and every reason to grieve, and I did not grieve because I knew, the way you know the sun comes up, that he was not dead and he was already coming. That's not faith. Faith is for things you're not sure of. This was the other thing. This was just knowing a fact about an animal I've known my whole life. He was alive because things like him are very hard to kill, and he was coming because I was the direction, and the only question was how long, and how long was never a thing that scared me because I could do how long. All I had to do was stay alive and stay findable. That was my whole job for 106 days. Stay alive, stay findable, let him do the rest. He's never once not done the rest." "You told the empty room you were all right," Cressa said. "Every night. We logged it as distress. The medical staff argued about it for a month. I wasn't talking to an empty room. The boy looked at her, and there was something in his young face that was older than the Concord and would outlast it. I know you swept the suite. I know there was nothing there for you to find. But you have to understand what a working dog family understands in the body, that your instruments can't measure and your file called folklore. When the two of you are bonded like that and separated, you don't feel gone to each other. Not all the way. It's thin, it's nothing you could put in a report, it's not a signal your sweep could catch, but it's real to us. It's the realest thing there is, and every night I sent it down the thin place. The same 3 things over and over because they were the 3 things he needed to carry him through one more day of walking. I'm all right. So he wouldn't rush, wouldn't take a risk, wouldn't tear through something he could go around. Hold on. So he'd keep the discipline of it, keep to the road, keep alive. And good boy, because that's the one that means everything to him. That's the one that's carried him since he was a pup. That's the one that says you're doing it right. You're being what you're for. Don't stop. 106 nights I sent it down the thin place, and I don't care whether he heard it the way I meant it or whether he just felt me alive out there in the direction he was already walking. Either way, he kept walking. Either way, he's asleep at my feet right now with your fleet scorch on his back and his belly full and nothing in the world left to do. You can write that it was distress vocalization if you have to. But you'd be writing the wrong thing, and you came here to write the true one. So I'm giving you the true one, and the true one is that it was 2 people keeping a promise across a distance, and one of them had 4 legs and did the hard part. Cressa looked at her recorder, and then she reached over and turned it off, and she sat with the boy and the sleeping dog in the golden light for a while without writing anything at all, because there are truths that a recording only makes smaller, and she had studied animals her whole life to understand the line between them and people, and a filthy 19-year-old on a hurting world had just erased the line in front of her with a story about a leather strap in a thin place. And she found she did not want it back. The Concord's need to understand a thing has always outrun its ability to leave a thing alone. And so, in the days that followed, while the boy and his dog rested, and the tribunal convened, and the fleet hung at its far anchor waiting to be told the war it had come to fight had never existed, the Sethari Concord did the thing it always did with a truth too large to hold, which was to try to write it small enough to file. Vessel scholar Cressa was given the writing of it, because she had been right for 19 days and because no one else could be trusted not to make it worse, and she sat with the boy across 3 long afternoons in the golden slant of Sethar Reach's declining sun, with the dog asleep between them, and she asked her questions, and she did not once, in 3 afternoons, get the answer she had been trained her whole life to expect. She had come to those afternoons believing she was documenting an apex organism of unprecedented capability. She left them having documented something her discipline had no instrument for, and she wrote, in the opening of the report that would reshape the Concord's whole doctrine of contact with Earth, a sentence that got her censured by 2 branches and quoted by everyone. The error was never in our measurements. We measured the animal correctly. The animal is exactly as formidable as our worst estimate. The error was in our imagination, which could conceive of a thing that formidable only as a weapon, and so we went looking for the enemy who had built it and aimed it, and there was no enemy and no builder and no aim. There was a boy, and there was a dog that loved him, and the most dangerous organism this Concord has ever encountered was pointed at nothing more strategic than getting home. We were not outgunned at Sethar Reach. We were outloved by a species we had filed as minor, and the whole of our fleet was the measure of how badly we had misunderstood the difference. They wanted to give the dog a rank. That was the part that Kell Arden told, years later, to anyone who would listen, always with the same tired, affectionate disbelief, that the Sethari Concord, having failed to kill his dog with an entire fortress world's arsenal, had responded by trying to enroll it. There was a formal proposal, sponsored by 3 branches, to enter Bishop into the Concord's register of honored war organisms with a posthumous equivalent designation and a citation, and the boy was fairly sure, a small pension, and Dre had brought the proposal to Kell himself, sheepish under his plating because someone had to, and Kell had listened to the whole thing with his hand on the sleeping dog's flank and then said very kindly, "He's not a war organism. He's a dog. If you give him a rank, you'll have got it wrong all over again, just in a nicer direction. You want to honor him." And Dre had said yes, the Concord did sincerely want to honor him, and Kell had thought about it and said, "Then next time a human tells you their animal is coming, believe them. That's the whole honor. That's the only one he'd want if he wanted things which he doesn't because he's a dog." And the Concord, which did not know how to do a thing without codifying it, had gone away and codified even that. And to this day, there is a standing directive in the Sethari contact protocols, entered under a long formal designation but known throughout the fleet by the plain name the ranks gave it. And the plain name is "believe them about the animal." And it is the only line of Concord doctrine ever written that a fleet salutes without being ordered to. The maulers were the last thing to be settled, and it was the boy who settled them. They were still in their kennel, 40 of them, and they had not been right since the morning. They would not eat, would not muster, lay pressed flat and low the way they had lain when the gray crossed the wall, as though the shame of having yielded had gone into them and would not come out. The master-at-arms, the scarred old vor who had raised the pack, came to Dre near despair, because a broken pack is a dead pack, and he did not know how to give his animals back the thing they had lost in the yard, which was their belief that they were the top of their small, violent world. And Dre, who had learned by then to bring human problems to humans, brought it to the boy. Kell went down to the kennel in the evening with Bishop walking slow at his side, and Cadet Yearn went with them, because she could not stay away, and the boy stood at the gate of the kennel and looked at the 40 pressed-flat maulers for a while, and then he opened the gate, which no one had told him he could do, and which the master-at-arms lunged to stop, and Dre stopped the master-at-arms from stopping. And Kell walked into a pen of the 40 most dangerous animals within 100 light-years, with an old gray dog at his heel, and the maulers came off the floor. They did not attack. Yearn had her heart in her throat, and they did not attack. They rose, all 40, and they came toward the boy and the old dog low and slow with their heads down, and Bishop stood among them, unbothered, and let them come. And what happened next Yearn did not have the words for until Mara Sen gave them to her later. The maulers came to Bishop the way young soldiers come to an old one. They pressed close and they lowered their blunt armored heads, and they were, Yearn realized, asking him something, and the old dog answered it simply by being what he was, calm and easy and unafraid, and entirely without any need to prove the thing to them. And one by one the maulers took it in, the lesson that lived under the whole affair, that the top of the world is not the one who wins the fight, it is the one who does not need to have it. Bishop moved through the pack and touched noses with them, unhurried, and let the youngest of them mouth gently at his scarred old jowls, the way pups test an elder. And by the time the sun was down, the 40 maulers were up and easy and pressing around the boy for the attention he gave them freely. And the master-at-arms stood at the gate with his hands over his face, because his pack was not broken after all. His pack had only, for the first time in 40 generations, met the actual thing they had been bred in the image of, and it had not destroyed them. It had shown them what they were for. And there is no gift like that. And it had come from a 13-year-old dog on a cool evening on a fortress world at the end of the longest walk in the history of the sector. "He's teaching them," Yearn said, wondering, watching the old dog lie down in the middle of the pack and the 40 maulers arrange themselves around him like a class around a master. "He walked through a fleet to get here, and now he's just teaching them to be calm." "He's not teaching them anything," Kell said, from the middle of the pack with a mauler's great head in his lap and 3 more pressed against his back. "He doesn't know how to teach. He just knows how to be, and they can see it, and seeing it is the whole lesson. He scratched the mauler under its plated chin, and it made a sound Yearn had not known the animals could make, a low broken rumble of pure content. That's how it always worked with him. He never trained anybody. He just stood in the middle of the scared things and was calm until the calm was catching, worked on the stock, worked on me when I was small and the nights were bad. He looked down at Bishop, dozing now among the maulers in the last of the light. Worked on a whole fortress today, come to think of it. Same trick, only trick he's got. Turns out it's enough. The fleet stood down that night formally, and HFY brought the Anthethine sister ship in from the far anchor to do it in the open where the humans could see. Because Envoy Ray had made it quietly clear that the humans would like to see. And the Conquered had discovered a new and uncomfortable appetite for doing things where the humans could see. 11 capital hulls, which had come to a fortress world to kill a legend, powered down their forward batteries in sequence over the plain, one after another, a slow procession of the sector's heaviest weapons going cold on purpose, and it should have felt like defeat, and to Venaru's surprise it did not. It felt like setting down a weight. She had carried the belief her whole career that the guns were what made the Conquered safe, and she had watched the guns fail against a gray old animal that wanted nothing but a boy. And standing on her bridge, watching the batteries cool, she found she was not frightened by the failure the way she had expected to be. She was, if anything, relieved, the way you are relieved when a lie you have been maintaining is finally too heavy to hold, and someone takes it from your hands. The guns had never been what made them safe. Nothing had ever made them safe. That was simply the shape of being alive in a large universe, and the dog had not created the danger. The dog had only, for one morning, made it impossible to keep pretending otherwise. And a species that cannot pretend its danger away has at least the chance to grow up, which a species that can does not. Dre did not sleep. He sat the whole night in the eastern yard, near the boy and the dog, at the same respectful distance he had first knelt at, and Cressa sat with him, and for a long time neither of them said anything, two old servants of a Conquered that had changed under them in a single day, watching a human child sleep at last in the crook of a sleeping animal's body, with the whole ruined plain silver around them under the fortress lights. "I keep returning to the water," Dre said finally, low so as not to wake the boy. "In the morning, when it stopped and drank. I gave the order to fire the lance because it stopped, do you know that? I had told myself it stopped because we had finally heard it, because it was gathering itself, because a thing that stops is a thing you can finish. And it had stopped to drink from a crater because it was thirsty. I fired the heaviest weapon a fortress is permitted to carry at an animal getting a drink of water. I have done many things in a long service, scholar, that I would take back if the universe allowed taking things back, and it does not, and I have made my peace with most of them because they were done in the honest dark where none of us could see. This one was done in the light. At noon. It drank and I saw it drink, and I fired anyway because I could not let it be an animal getting a drink. I needed it to be a monster too badly." He was quiet a moment. "I think that is the thing I will carry, not that I was beaten. I have been beaten, that I needed the monster. That the monster was mine, and I made it, and I aimed a fleet at a thirsty animal to keep from having to look at the smaller and much worse truth, which was that we had stolen a child and his family had come to take him home." "You looked at it in the end," Cressa said. "In front of everyone, you knelt in your own yard. That is more than most of us manage, Sub-Marshal, and it is certainly more than the Conquered as an institution will manage. The institution will file the report and salute the new directive and go on believing, at the bottom, that sufficient force settles any question, because the alternative is to rebuild the whole floor it stands on, and institutions do not do that, only people do that, one at a time, usually too late." She looked at the sleeping boy. "He forgave you, you know. Not with the grand speech the envoy gave, that was justice, that was the account being read. The boy did the other thing. He put your hand on the dog's head. He is 19 and he spent 106 days behind your prefect's glass, and the first free thing he did was to make certain the animal that loves him would not have to be afraid of you. That is not weakness. That is the same thing the dog has, run through a person instead of an animal, the refusal to hold the hardness a moment longer than the danger requires. They are the same creature, those two, the boy and the dog. That is the thing my report cannot say, and it is the truest thing I learned. We kept asking what made the animal so formidable. The answer was the boy. And we kept asking what made the boy so calm behind our glass, and the answer was the animal. You cannot understand either of them alone. We took them apart and studied the halves and understood nothing. And then this morning they came back together in your yard, and the whole thing was suddenly, terribly obvious. And it cost 400 lives and a fleet's dignity to see a thing a child on a hurting world could have told us for free. The boy slept 11 hours, which the human medical staff said was the first real sleep he had gotten since the wreck. And while he slept, the fortress rearranged itself around him with a tenderness that would have been unthinkable a day before. Cadet Yearn drew the watch over him. She asked for it, and no one argued, because by then the whole garrison understood that the young Skarn who hummed had become, without anyone deciding it, the fortress's bridge to the two creatures in the yard. She sat the watch through the small hours with a field lamp and a blanket the humans had given her for the boy, and near dawn the old dog woke, lifted its great head, and looked at her across the sleeping boy, and Yearn went very still, because she was alone with it in the dark and it was awake and looking at her. And the gray regarded her for a long moment with its sorrowful patient eyes, and then it did a thing that undid her completely. It shifted its heavy body slowly, so as not to wake the boy, and it stretched one foreleg out across the small space between them, and laid its great scarred paw over the top of her foot, and put its head back down and slept. She did not move her foot for 3 hours. She told no one for years. But she kept ever after a particular understanding that she could never quite fit into words, which was that the most dangerous thing in the sector had chosen, in the one private unwitnessed hour of the whole affair, with no fleet watching and no report being written and nothing to be gained, to put its paw on the foot of the one who had hummed, and that this, not the walk through the lance, not the bow, not the broken wall, this was the actual measure of the thing it truly was underneath the legend, and that she had been given it as a gift precisely because it would never be believed and so could never be used, and that some truths are only handed to you on the condition that you cannot prove them. Word of the affair went out across the sector faster than the Concord's political branch could shape it, because there had been 11 capital bridges watching, and thousands of crew, and the recording Cressa Un had made, and you cannot classify a thing that 1,000 beings have already wept over. It went out, and it changed in the telling, the way true things change into legend. But the legend it changed into was not the one the Concord had built across 200 days. The gray stopped being the thing that broke 11 installations. It became the thing that crossed a war for love and bode in a fortress yard, and the 200 dead became not the toll of a monster but the price of everyone who had stood in its road, and the moral the sector drew, in cantinas and on bridges and in the long quiet of the deep runs, was the one the ranks had already carved into doctrine. Believe them about the animal. Do not put a wall between a human and their own. There is no wall. They will come, or something they made and raised and loved will come in their place, and it will walk through everything you have, at a stroll, because you were never the point, you were only ever the thing in the way. They left on the 3rd day, in the bright of the noon that the whole affair had happened under, and the fortress turned out to watch them go. No one ordered it. That was the thing Dre noted, standing at the head of the assembly with his plating polished for the first time in a 19-day campaign, that no order had gone out for the garrison to muster, and the garrison had mustered anyway, every soul who could be spared from a station, lining the long walk from the fortress core to the grounded human ships, and past them the 40 maulers loose and calm and sitting at heel along the route with no handler needed, and past them, at the edge of the plain. the human delegation waiting by the open ramp of the white ship, and it had all assembled itself in the way that important things assemble themselves among people who have shared one, without instruction, out of a common understanding that a thing was ending that ought to be marked. The two medical Ashen came to the boy before he walked the line. Kel was on his feet again, rested, cleaned up, wearing human clothes his own people had brought him, and he looked, Yearn thought, younger than he had behind the glass, which was strange because he was 3 days older and free. But the calm he had worn as a captive had been the calm of someone holding himself very still around a wound, and this was a different calm, looser, a boy who had put a weight down. The tall Ashen said, through the translator, that she was glad he was well, and the short one, the one who had argued for 3 months that he was in shock, said nothing through the translator at all. She simply rippled a long, slow band of color at him. And the boy, who had spent 106 days learning their color speech the way you learn anything you are locked in a room with, rippled nothing back because he could not, but he put his hand flat over his own chest in the human way. And the short Ashen understood it, and the two of them stood a moment in the noon light having a conversation that needed no matrix, the medic who had been kind and the specimen who had never been a specimen. And then the boy said aloud, "You wouldn't put me to sleep." When the voice on the speaker told you to. You said it was unethical to sedate a calm creature to make his calm easier to read. I heard you say it. You were behind 2 walls of glass and you thought I couldn't hear and you fought for me anyway, to a room that outranked you, over a human you'd been told was barely a person. I won't forget it. Neither will he. And Bishop, on cue or on instinct or on the plain fact of the boy's hand tightening in his ruff, leaned his great gray weight against the short Ashen's mobility harness, gently, the whole soft mass of him, and the boneless alien medic wrapped 2 tentacles around the enormous scarred head and held it, and did not let go for a long time, and no one hurried her. Then the boy walked the line, and the fortress watched him walk it. He walked it slowly, with the dog at his heel, and he stopped here and there, for the ones who caught his eye. He stopped for the scarred old master at arms and said something that made the Vor's crest lift. He stopped for the young Skarn gun crew that had broken at their peace and told them, Yearn heard, that there was no shame in a body knowing before a mind did, that their bodies had simply understood a day before their orders caught up, and that this was not cowardice but the oldest kind of sense. He stopped for Cressa Un and told her to write it true, all of it, the water and the lance and the bow, and she said she would, and she did. And at the end of the line, he came to Osivant Dre, and the old sub-marshal and the young man looked at each other for a moment in the noon light with the whole changed fortress watching, and Dre said the thing he had prepared, which was short. "I fired everything I had at you both," Dre said, "and you leave my fortress giving my people your kindness on the way out the door. I do not understand your species, Kel Arden. I have decided I do not need to. I only need to remember, the next time a human tells me a quiet true thing I do not want to believe, that the last time I chose not to believe one it cost me 400 souls and every certainty I owned, and that the human was a child, and the child was right, and the thing the child warned me of walked through my whole arsenal to prove it and then licked the water off the boy's hand and went asleep in the sun. Go home. Take your dog. And tell your people," the old warrior paused and got it out, "tell your people the conquered is sorry. Not the branches. Not the record. Me. Tell them one old soldier who did it is sorry and meant it and knelt in the dirt to say so where it could be seen." "I'll tell them," Kel said. And then, because he was his people, and because the hardness was never held a moment past its use, he reached out and gripped the old Vor's plated forearm and he said, "You knelt. Most wouldn't have. He knew you were all right the second you came into the yard with your hands open. You saw him say hello. He doesn't say hello to weapons. He said hello to you. Trust his read of it. He's better at people than the whole Concord put together, and he's never been wrong about one yet." He let go. "Take care of the maulers. They'll be different now. Better. Let them be it." He walked up the ramp with the dog beside him, and at the top he turned once and lifted his hand, not a wave, the same low, flat gesture he had lifted in the yard, the working dog family's small salute, and the fortress, 4,000 armored souls and 40 maulers and 11 capital hulls in the high dark, went entirely still to receive it. And then the ramp closed, and the white ship sealed, and the human flotilla made ready to lift. The ships lifted at noon, and the whole of Sethar Reach watched them go, and Cadet Yearn watched from the outer works where she had first drawn a slit on the morning the Gray came walking, and the thing she noticed, the thing she would tell the young cadets under her own command years later when they asked her, because they always asked her, once they learned she had been there, was that not one being on the fortress looked away. You would think, she told them, that a garrison that had spent 19 days and a war's worth of ordnance failing to kill a thing would want, more than anything, to see the back of it, to watch the ships shrink and vanish and feel the sector settle back into a shape where the guns meant something again. And it was not like that. It was the opposite of that. 4,000 souls stood in the noon light and watched the white ships carry a boy and an old dog up through the sky, and there was in that watching none of the relief of a threat departing. There was grief. Plain grief, the whole fortress full of it, the particular ache of having been in the presence of something true and knowing it was leaving and would not come again. And Yearn understood, standing in it, that the Gray had given them all a wound that did not heal in the usual direction, that they would spend the rest of their service a little haunted by the memory of an animal that had shown them, for one morning, exactly how small their certainties were, and exactly how large a plain thing like love could be. And that they would not, any of them, be able to look at a human quite the same way again, or a gun, or their own reasons for the things they had done. The ships went up into the blue and through it and were gone, and the fortress stood a while longer looking at the empty sky, and then, slowly, in ones and twos, it went back to being a fortress, and it was never quite as good at it again, and the sector was better for that than it had been before. The fates of the rest of it settled the way such things settle. The tribunal broke Prefect Sale, as everyone had known it would, though Dre's testimony spared him the worst of it, and turned the proceeding, in the end, less into the punishment of one administrator than into the Concord's first halting attempt to look at its own blindness, which was more than a broken man deserved, and exactly what the Concord needed. Ossivant Dre was offered a promotion he did not want, and a quiet retirement he did, and he took neither. He asked instead to be posted to the contact branch, to the unglamorous slow work of learning the species the Concord had misjudged, and he spent his last years of service doing the thing he had learned too late to do, which was to believe humans about the quiet true things. And he was, by every account, very good at it, because a fleet had had to break under him before he could learn it, and he never let himself forget the sound of the water and the light of the noon and the smear of dust on his gauntlet. Cressa Un wrote her report, and it was censured and it was quoted, and it reshaped the doctrine anyway, the way true things do, working around the censure like water around a stone. Mara Sen was recalled from her quiet nothing of a posting and given a hard, important one, and she was good at it, and she never once in a long career filed a warning about a human matter that the Concord dared to write folklore beside, because they had learned, and because she had a way of ending her dispatches, when the matter was grave, with a single line that had become, in Concord circles, a thing that made admirals sit up. Believe me about the animal. And Cadet Yearn rose. She had not meant to. She had meant only to serve out an ordinary term and go home to the Scar and Hatch worlds. But the morning the Gray came walking had put something into her that would not let her settle for ordinary, and she made rank faster than anyone in her line, and when at last she had rank enough to spend it on a thing she wanted rather than a thing she was assigned, she spent it on a posting no one else wanted, a long, slow liaison rotation out on the human frontier, among the working worlds, and she requested, and because of who she was and what she had seen, she was granted, a leave to visit one particular world, a cold, high-herding colony on the eastern shelf of nowhere, a place called Dovetail, where she had reason to believe an old gray dog was living out its days in the sun. Dovetail was everything the file had said, and nothing the file had managed to convey, which is the usual failure of files. The file said, "High, cold, marginal, an agricultural colony of no strategic value on the eastern shelf of a frontier system, population sparse, industry pastoral, unremarkable." The file did not say what it was to stand on the eastern shelf at dawn, with the wind coming off 10,000 square kilometers of open range, and the grass running silver-green to a horizon broken only by the dark line of the far hills, or how the light came up cold and enormous over a land that had never been fenced because there was too much of it and never would be, or how a person born to that emptiness might grow up with a particular unhurried steadiness in them. The steadiness of someone whose whole childhood was spent small under a very large sky with weather that would kill you if you sat down in it. Yearn understood the boy better in her first hour on Dovetail than she had in all the days at Sethar Reach. You did not raise a captive's calm on a world like this. You raised the other thing. You raised people who did not panic, because panic on the open range got you dead, and who did not leave their own, because on a world this hard and this empty, the only thing between you and the dark was the few living things that had decided you were theirs. They ran stock, the Ardens, thousands of head across ground too broad to see the edge of, the way 6 generations of them had, and they took the arrival of a conquered officer on their land with the flat frontier courtesy of people who had seen stranger things come over the hills and would go on seeing them, and did not intend to make a fuss about any of it. Kell's mother gave Yearn a cup of something hot and bitter and asked after the journey. Kell's father, a lean, weathered man with the boy's same steady eyes, allowed as how they'd heard some version of what had happened out there in the black, and reckoned most of it had gotten taller in the telling, and did not seem especially interested in the true height of it, because to the Ardens the story was not the fleet and the lance and the bow. The story was simply that their boy had been taken and their dog had gone and got him, which was the sort of thing their dogs did, and which did not, on Dovetail, require a fleet to make it remarkable or a tribunal to make it right. It had already been remarkable before the aliens ever saw it. It had been remarkable for 4,000 years. The aliens had just been the last to find out. Kell was 3 years older and he was still young, and he was, when Yearn found him, exactly where the whole sector would have least expected to find the being at the center of its largest legend. He was up to his knees in a stock pen in the cold morning, filthy to the elbow, doctoring a lame yearling, swearing at it without heat, entirely absorbed in the small, hard, endless work of the place. He straightened when he saw her, and his face broke into something glad, and he said, "The one who hums," and Yearn found that after all the years and all the rank she still could not speak for a moment, and the boy saw it and did not make her and just said, "Come on. He's up by the house. He'll want to see you. He remembers, you know. He remembers everybody who was kind." And there, at last, on a bench in the pale noon sun, by the door of a plain stone house at the edge of the largest emptiness Yearn had ever stood in, was the most dangerous organism the Sethari conquered had ever encountered, and it was asleep. Bishop was old now, truly old, grayer than he had been in the yard, his muzzle gone nearly white, one hip stiff enough that he no longer rose in a single heave but got himself up in stages, considering. He lay in the sun on the warm stone with his chin on his paws and his sides going slow, and when the boy came near, he did not leap up. He was past leaping. He only opened his eyes and thumped his heavy tail twice against the stone, and gave the boy the whole of his attention, which was the thing he had always given the boy and would give him to the end. And Kell sat down on the bench beside him and put a hand on the old white head, and Yearn stood in the noon light of a hurting world and looked at the animal a fleet had emptied its guns on, and it yawned, hugely, pink tongue curling, and settled its chin back on its paws and went back to sleep. And it was, in every particular that a conquered instrument could measure, a very old dog enjoying the sun. "They send people sometimes," Kell said, watching her look at him. "Not many, yours mostly. They come a long way and they stand about where you're standing and they get this look, and I know the look because it's the same look everybody in that yard had. They come expecting, I don't know what they come expecting. The thing from the recording, the one that walked through the wall, and they get this. He scratched the old dog's ear, and the dog groaned with pleasure, an absurd, undignified, deeply ordinary sound. An old dog on a bench, and it breaks something in them every time, and I used to think it was disappointment, and it isn't. It's the other thing. It's that they finally get it. Standing here looking at him asleep in the sun, they finally understand the thing I couldn't make any of you understand behind the glass, which is that this is what he always was. The one in the recording and the one on the bench are the same dog. There's no switch. The one that crossed the war and the one that can't get up the porch step without thinking about it, same animal, all the way through, and the walking through a fleet part was never the impressive part. The lying in the sun part is the impressive part. The walking through a fleet was just what the lying in the sun does when somebody takes the boy away. Yearn stayed the day, and toward evening she saw the last thing she had come, without quite admitting it to herself, to see. The light went long and gold across the range, and the stock drifted toward the low ground the way stock does at dusk, and something changed in the old dog on the bench. He lifted his head. He had been asleep, or near it, all the warm afternoon, and now he raised his white muzzle into the cooling wind and read something on it that Yearn could not read, and he got himself up off the bench in his slow considering stages, and he stood a moment testing the evening, and then he walked stiff, unhurried, certain, out from the house and down the slope toward the flock and the gathering dark beyond it, and he took up a position at the edge of the light, facing out. Facing the hills and the coming night, and whatever the dovetail dark still held after 4,000 years of dogs like him standing exactly here and telling it no, and he sat, and he was still, and the flock behind him did not so much as lift a head, because the wall was up, the way the wall had always been up. The way the wall would be up until this old body finally failed, and a younger one took the post, world without end. Kel came and stood beside Yearn to watch him. "There's still things out there," he said quietly, nodding at the dark line of the hills. "Real ones, older than the colony. They come down off the shelf when the nights get long, and they're fast and they're patient, and there's more of them than there is of him." He was quiet a moment, watching the old gray shape hold its line against the dusk. "He's too old to fight one now. We both know it. But here's the thing you learned in that yard and your whole conquered still chewing on. He doesn't have to fight one. He just has to be there, sitting, calm, facing out. 4,000 years taught the things in those hills exactly what that shape means, the same way it taught your maulers, the same way it finally taught your submarshal, that the calm one facing out is the one you do not test, because the calm is not the absence of the fight. The calm is the promise of it, held in reserve, offered as a mercy. They read him at 1,000 meters and they turn around. He hasn't had to make good on it in years." He smiled, faint in the last of the light. "That's the whole animal, Yearn. That's all he ever was. Everything your fleet threw at him was just you finding out, the hard, expensive way, what everything in those hills already knew. You don't shoot the calm one facing out. You especially don't get between him and what he's facing out for." Yearn left Dovetail the next morning, and she carried the evening with her for the rest of her long service, the old white dog holding his line against the dark with a flock dreaming safe behind him, and she thought of it often, on the bridges and in the councils and in the slow, deep runs. Whenever some confident voice proposed that a question could be settled by bringing enough, she thought of the bench, and the sun, and the yawn, and the slow considering rise at dusk, and the 4,000 years standing behind one tired gray animal that had walked through her whole fleet at a stroll, and then come home to lie down in the light. And she never did find the words for it that would make anyone who had not been there understand. But she stopped trying in the end because she had understood the thing itself, which was better than words, and the thing itself was this: that the Sethari conquered had fired everything it had at the top of a world it did not understand, and the top of that world had walked through all of it without hurrying and without hating them, and without once raising a claw, and had crossed a fortress yard, and had bowed, not to their guns, which had never mattered, and not in surrender, which it had never owed, but to the small ordinary boy at the center of everything it had ever been for. Laying its great head across his knees in the noon light while a fleet looked on and learned, too late and at great cost and forever. The one thing the boy had been telling them calmly from the first hour behind the glass. It was never a monster. It was only ever love from a hard world wearing the shape their fear had given it. And love from a hard world does not stop. It does not tire. It cannot be turned. It walks through everything you have at the pace of an old dog with nowhere it needs to be by any particular hour, and it lies down at last exactly where it was always going, next to the boy in the sun home.